Hey everybody, welcome on our channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the Paragon of Korra? Part 2. If you are new on the channel, don't forget to subscribe our channel and like the video too. So without wasting any more time, let's start the story. Korra braced herself as a large ball came flying at her, catching it with ease. It was a training technique for pro bending that would help her hold her guard against attacks in the ring. And while she was all for that, there was just one problem she had. What's the big idea making me train this early in the morning? She asked Mako and Bolan. The morning is evil. That's because you stayed up, Arashi remarked as he supervised the training from just outside the triangle. I did not, she said in reply as she threw the ball at Bolan. We're the rookies, he answered as he caught the ball and threw it at his brother. So we get the worst time slot in the gym. And you're the rookiest of us all, Mako told Korra. We gotta get you up to speed if we want to survive the memorial tournament. He tossed the ball at her. Deal with it. She caught it and looked at him with a scowl. You deal with it. She threw the ball right back at him, and since he wasn't expecting it, it got him right in the stomach, sending him flying back onto the ground. Pay attention, Mako, Arashi told him while the avatar smirked triumphantly. The sounds of hands clapping filled the air, making them all stop. There are my hard-working little street urchins, a man in a fine suit and hat said at the door. He walked forward to them while they gathered around. It's nice to finally meet you, Avatar, he greeted Korra. And you are? She asked with a suspicious frown. Yutaka, he introduced himself, taking off his hat in a small bow, while also revealing that he had no hair. I run this whole pro-bending shebang. He was also the earthbender for the Republic City Dragons, Arashi commented. They used to call him the Badgermole. Ah, Arashi, the man said, putting his hat back on his head. I do so love it when you remind me of the glory days. How do you know what team he was with? Korra asked the blonde. The Republic City Dragons weren't just any pro-bending team, he said, looking at her. They were my dad's team. They were the ones who ended the Bora Pine's reign as champions. And now, I run the business, Yutaka finished. He reached into his coat and pulled out a good deal of money. Here's your winnings from the last match, he told Mako, who took the money with a big grin on his face. But before he could put it away, the older earthbender intervened. Not so fast, he said, waving his finger. He took some of the money with each thing he spoke of. First, you owe me for the Avatar's new gear, gym and equipment rentals from last month, rent on your apartment, and a personal loan for groceries. The last one took away the rest of the money, and Mako looked at the emptiness of his hand. While he could understand why most of the money disappeared, he knew that the groceries shouldn't have taken away that much. There was only one person who was responsible for that and he was related to him. What? Bolan asked as his brother glared at him. I'm a growing boy. He rubbed his belly to emphasize his point. But Yutaka was not done. Oh, and one more small item of business. The fire ferrets need to ante up 30,000 yuans for the championship pot. 30,000 yuans? Repeated Bolan, shocked at the number. He and Mako were lucky if they had 5,000 yuans. Can't you give them some slack, Yutaka? Arashi asked the man with a small pleading tone in his voice. If I did that, I wouldn't be a good businessman, he said. He was sympathetic, but business was first. Sorry, boys, he told the brothers, placing a hand on Mako's shoulder. You've got till the end of the week to come up with the dough, or else, you're out of the tournament. He walked away, leaving the four of them alone in the gym again. You wouldn't happen to have a secret Avatar banking account overflowing with money, would you? Bolan asked Korra with a slightly hopeful tone to his voice. She pulled out her empty pockets. I got nothing, she answered. I never really needed money. And that didn't really work out for her when she first got to the city. I've always had people taking care of me. Then I wouldn't say you have nothing, Mako said shortly as he put the training ball away in a duffel bag. She winced slightly. Sorry, I didn't mean. No, it's all right, Bolan said, stopping her before she began. It's just ever since we lost our parents, we've been on our own. I'm so sorry, she apologized. I didn't know. So, anyway, Mako said, moving on from the current line of conversation as he hefted the duffel bag up onto his shoulder. How are we going to come up with the money? He looked over at Arashi. Do you think there's a chance that you could write to your grandfather and get him to give us the money? If I knew where he went, I would do it in a heartbeat, the blonde answered. But he doesn't even leave a note when he leaves. Oh, I got it. Bolan said excitedly. He squatted down and picked up Pabu, his pet fire ferret. I've been training Pabu to do circus tricks. Now people will pay good money to see that. Come on, Bolan, Mako told him. We need serious ideas. His feelings a little crushed, he lowered Pabu a little with a downcast expression on his face. I was serious, he said quietly. Don't worry about it, his brother said. I'll take care of it. I always do. As he walked out of the gym, Bolan stood back up and watched him leave. Then a determined expression appeared on his face. Location: Central City Station. Come one, come all. Bolan called out as he sat on a thin carpet at the base of Lord Zuko's statue, wearing a semi-elaborate robe and a fake mustache, facing the people who were walking to and from the big station that lay beyond the station. See Pabu the fantastic fire ferret as he crosses the ladder of peril upside down. When nothing happened, he looked at Pabu, who was wearing a shirt and a hat. PSST, PSST. He whispered. The fire ferret got the hint and started the trick, walking on his front paws across the ladder of peril, which was a plank settled on 2 cups. Big finish, little buddy, Bolan urged him on. Stick the landing. When Pabu got to the other side, he flipped off and landed on one paw. Ta-da! The earthbender declared. One of the many people passing by threw a coin into the donation can. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You are too kind. Seriously, too kind. You can come back and put money right in this. He picked up the can and shook, only to stop when he heard how little there was in there. Okay, that's fine, that's fine. He looked down at the 1 coin in the cup. 1 yuan down, 29,999 to go. Well, I'll give you props for speaking, Bolan, Arashi said from where he leaning against the statue. But I think you're going to need something a little more than Pabu walking across a plank of wood on 2 cups. Do you have any better ideas? No, you're the one who was training him to do the tricks. Just then, a Satomobile rolled up to the curve. Both Arashi and Bolan tensed at the sight of it, knowing full well that red and a lion turtle insignia on the front grille meant only one thing. Triple threat. The window rolled down and the driver stuck his head out the window. Hey, Bolan, is that you? He called out. What clothing that could be seen through the window was blue, showing that he was a tribesman and most likely a waterbender. Oh, hey there, Shady Shin, Bolan said in greeting, albeit nervously. He had known Shady Shin back when he had been a kid during his and Mako's troubled youth. The triad member stepped out of the Satomobile and walked over to the earthbender. Heard you're a big-time pro-bending player now, he remarked aloud. Not bad. Thanks. What do you want, Shin? Arashi asked with a suspicious look in his eyes. The man wasn't called Shady for nothing. If he was insulted by the tone of the blonde's voice, he didn't show it. Hey there, little man, he greeted him, making it sound like he had just seen him. Then he turned his attention back to Bolan. So listen. I got an offer for you. Lightning Bolt Zolt is looking to hire some extra muscle. Why haven't I heard of this? Arashi said. Shin looked him over with a look of barely held contempt. Just because your uncle's in the gang doesn't mean you're told every little thing. The look of contempt was replaced by one that showed he thought himself smart. But if you joined, I'm sure we would welcome you, even with your rather pathetic skills. The kid glared hard at him. You want to take up that idea to my grandfather when he returns? He asked. I'm sure that you will not survive the conversation. He smirked when the confident smile on Shin's face faltered and a bead of sweat appeared on his brow. Shin. Bolan said, feeling a little more nervous. Mako told me to stay away from the triple threats. As he looked at the earthbender, the sweat disappeared and his confident smile turned into a scoff. Your brother ain't the boss of you. It's just a little security work. Nothing crooked. He reached into his coat, pulled out a large wad of cash, and threw it into the can. Bolan looked at the wad and using an old trick he had learned as a kid, counted the amount. Once he figured it out, he began to freak out. The cash in his can would be enough to cover at least a quarter of the ante for the championship. And there would certainly be more where that came from. You game? Shady Shin asked. Location: Air Temple Island. Okay, I'm ready. Korra shouted at Jinora and Ikki as she stood on one side of the gate contraption and they stood on the other side as the night began in the sky above them. The 2 girls bent the air around them and blasted it at the gates. Once they started spinning, Korra moved through them. Instead of just charging right in this time, she actually moved with the movements of the gates, turning away at the meeting of resistance and always spinning. What had eluded her at first was now completely easy to do. How did I think this was hard? She asked herself as she turned away from another gate. She felt a little stupid for feeling that way now. Good, light on your feet. Jinora called out to her as she moved through the gates, soon coming out the other side. But while Korra was panting, it may have been easy but it was also tiring. She and Ikki saw something interesting. Ooh, he's cute, she said as she watched Mako come up the steps. Korra, is that the handsome firebender boy that drives you crazy? Korra thought as she stopped panting and recognized the fact that Jinora used a handsome firebender boy. She quickly looked over her shoulder and saw Mako coming her way. Does he make you crazy in a bad way? Ikki asked the tribeswoman. Or does he drive you crazy like you like him? The avatar quickly bent the earth beneath them to jut upwards and send them flying. She turned around, coughed, and looked at the visitor. Oh, hey, Mako, she greeted him, trying to act cool. You seen Bolan? He asked, straight to the point. And there he is, she thought to herself before saying, nice to see you, too. And no, I haven't seen him or Arashi since practice. Think something's wrong? I don't know. Bolan has a knack for getting into stupid situations, and despite what he might think otherwise, Arashi isn't any better. He turned around and started walking away. See you later. Wait, she said, going after him. I'll help you look for them. Nah, I got it, he replied with turning to face her and while waving her off. She grabbed him by his elbow, finally making him stop. Hey, cool guy, let me help you. We can take Naga. Who's Naga? My best friend and a great tracker, she answered proudly. Your best friend is a polar bear dog, Mako remarked as he rode behind Korra on Naga. They were padding down a street in the city and they were riding an animal that was as large, if not larger, as a Satomobile. Somehow, that makes perfect sense. I'll take that as a compliment, city boy, she told him, making them both smile. The rest of the ride was silent as Naga made her down the street and to Central City Station. To Korra, it felt like the streets had a whole different vibe to them. It felt more alive but also dangerous, like one should be careful if they were going. But strangely enough, the vibe also made her feel like she was the pro bending ring again, with her heart racing and her blood pumping. They soon found Central City Station and heading for the statue of Zuko, whose face looked different in the light of fire at night. So, do you see them? Korra asked her passenger. Well, this is Bolan's usual hangout, he said as he looked around the crowd of people in the plaza, but not seeing his brother Arashi. But no, I'm not seeing them. His eyes found a couple of street kids horsing around nearby. Without saying anything to Korra, he climbed down from Naga and went over to the kids. You guys seen my brother or a blonde kid around here today? He asked them. One of the kids stepped forward, obviously the leader. Perhaps, he answered while rubbing his nose. My memory's a little foggy. Maybe you can help clear it up. He held out his hand like he was expecting something. You're good, Scoochie. Humph, a real pro, Mako told him as he passed forward some cash into the kid's hand. The seconds that passed between the money landing in his palm and then disappearing into clothes was probably about 2, perhaps even 1. Yeah, I seen your brother, the kid answered. When? Asked the firebender. About noon, he answered. What was he doing? He was performing some kind of monkey rat circus. And then he looked away and held out his hand again. Mako rolled his eyes but handed him another yuan. And then what? Why did he leave? He leaned in and held his hand up to the side of his mouth. Shady Shin showed up and flashed some serious cash. Bo took off with him in his hot rod, the blonde kid too. The triple threats. The red monsoons. The NI case. All the triads are muscling up for something real big. Now that's all you're getting out of me. He turned away and then ran away back to the rest of the kids. What's he talking about? Korra asked Mako. Sounds like there's a turf war brewing, he replied. And Bolan and Arashi are about to get caught right in the middle of it. He turned around and started walking back towards Naga. Come on, he said to Korra as he passed. They both climbed up onto the back of the polar bear dog and Mako had a run south from the plaza. So where are we headed? Korra asked as they passed in the wake of 2 trolleys and then over a bridge. The triple threat triad's headquarters, he answered. Hopefully, Bolan and Arashi are there and nothing's gone down yet. The triple threat. She repeated. I beat up some of those yahoos when I got into town. I can understand Arashi a little bit, but why would Bolan get tangled up with her mouth snapped close when Naga suddenly shot forward, having found something interesting to eat? Whoa, Naga. Said Korra as the polar bear dog hung a hard right. Naga didn't hear her as she turned left onto a different street, still chasing that interesting something. It was only after that interesting something climbed up a lamppost that she stopped and her riders were able to see what it was. That's Pabu. Mako exclaimed as the fire ferret's mascot perched on the street sign. Naga was still interested in having said mascot as a snack until Korra pulled hard on the reins. No Naga, she said. Pabu's a friend, not a snack. The order calmed the polar bear dog down, allowing Pabu to get off the street sign and then slide down the pole until he was at the same height as Naga. The 2 animals sniffed at one another, getting the other's scent and then touched noses, signifying that all was well. After that was done, Pabu leapt off the pole, across Naga's head and back and onto Mako's shoulder. We gotta hurry. He said. Bolan never went anywhere without Pabu and since he wasn't here, it was worrying. Korra started Naga up again and the polar bear dog started running. Both tribeswoman and dog followed Mako's directions to the headquarters of the triple threat triad, which was revealed to be a restaurant. Something's not right, Mako said as he climbed down from Naga and approached the entrance. There are usually thugs posted outside. We better be cautious. He snuck up to the doors and peered inside. Once he saw that no one was on the other side, he motioned Korra to come up. She did and promptly kicked the doors. Without missing a beat, she walked into the place and the others followed her. The restaurant looked like a mix of a fight and a disaster had struck. There were tables thrown up against the wall with their settings all smashed and broken on the floor. The floor beneath them felt uneven and had a few missing chunks, showing that someone had been earthbending. The wet spots and ash marks on the walls and floor showed that waterbending and firebending had also been used. Something had gone down, something bad. "Bolan, you in here?" called out Mako. "Hey Arashi," shouted Korra, a little louder than he had done. He scowled at her, but then they started hearing a faint pounding coming from the back. Following the sound to the back of the restaurant, where the kitchen was, they found that it was coming from a food locker that had a chair propped up against. With a swift kick, Korra knocked it aside and opened the locker. Crouched inside of it was Arashi, who looked up and was relieved. "Thank the spirits it was you guys," he said as he took hold of Korra's offered hand and came out. "What happened here?" Mako asked him. "I have no idea. Bolan and I were upstairs when the attack started. My uncle tried taking us out the back, but we got caught here. My uncle barely had enough time to throw me into that locker before the fighting started." "When did this all happen?" 10 minutes ago, at the least." The sounds of engines roaring to life filled the kitchen, coming from the back door. The three of them raced towards said door and went through it into the back alleyway. At the end of the alleyway were several motorcycles and a single van all driving off. It became obvious that they were leaving in a hurry when the back door of the van flapped opened, revealing Triad members bound and gagged in it, along with Bolan. "Bolan!" shouted Mako at the sight of his brother. He, Korra and Arashi started running forward, only to stop when two motorcycle riders threw a grenade each at them. The grenades landed on the ground and began to emit a green smoke, making the three standing in the alleyway start coughing and obscuring their vision. When they made their way through the smoke, they saw that the motorcycles were getting away fast. "Naga, come!" Korra shouted for the polar bear dog, which came to her side instantly. The three of them climbed on, but it was a little uncomfortable for Arashi, who was sitting on Naga herself rather than the saddle. So when she started going after the kidnappers, he felt every bump and turn. "Ah! Ow! Ouch! This was a horrible idea," he shouted with each bump. "Just shut up and hold on," Korra told him while also thanking the spirits that she had the good sense to put Mako between her and him. As they got closer to the kidnappers, Mako started bending short blasts of fire at them. But the motorcycle riders just swerved away and between the blasts, avoiding them completely. Korra lent support by trying to crash one via earthbending, but the rider just used the jutted stone like a ramp and landed back down easily. It was only when they came out of the alleyway and into an open area that the kidnappers fought back. They did so by having some of their motorcycle rider turn around suddenly. One of them threw a bola at the polar bear dog, aiming for the legs. It struck and wrapped itself tightly, making Naga stumble and then fall hard onto the ground. Her passengers were sent flying through the air and hit the ground just as hard. As Korra, Mako, and Arashi got their bearings back, the riders, who were wearing a dark green uniform with burgundy patches, along with a helmet that covered their faces completely and bordered by yellow tubing on the sides of the face, got off their motorcycles, leapt into the air with high flips, and came right at them. "We've got incoming!" Arashi shouted as he scrambled back onto his feet, pulling out a knife. "We can see that," Korra told him, also getting back onto her feet. She bent a blast at the kidnapper coming right at her, who avoided it by flipping past it and came right at her. She tried to fight back with her firebending, but the kidnapper kept deflecting the blasts by using his hands and arms to move hers out of the way. When she tried using a high kick move, he locked his own foot against hers and twisted it down, forcing her to turn her back to him. He quickly jabbed a series of points on her and without any warning, she lost all feeling in her right arm. But she still had use of her left arm and her legs, and she was going to use those as much as she could. But it proved to be most difficult and she wasn't the only one having trouble. Mako was faring just as poorly against his own opponent and she really couldn't tell how the fight Arashi was in was going from out of the corner of her eye. Even though they tried putting up a good fight, the kidnappers made their limbs go numb and sent them back down to the ground. "This isn't good," Arashi noted as he saw Korra and Mako go down. His moment of notice left an opening his opponent took advantage of and struck points on his body that made him fall to the ground, his knife skidding away from his hand. But while he had not beaten his opponent, he could take pride in the fact that he had wounded the guy. He could see the cuts he made in the uniform and the blood that was seeping out from those cuts. But the fact remained the same, they had lost control of their bodies and could not fight back. The kidnappers started moving forward, swinging bolas around in an effort to get them ready. Their green goggles showed no eyes and that, plus the red circle high between the goggles, made for an image that would not leave their minds. But the kidnappers had forgotten to factor one important detail. An angry polar bear dog that could destroy bola cords with a snap of her jaws. Naga broke free of her bonds and leapt for the kidnappers, making them leap back. She roared at them and Pabu added in his own screech once he hopped down from her head. The kidnappers shared a look between the two of them and leapt away, throwing down another grenade to cover their escape on the motorcycles. Naga didn't even bother to pursue them. Her concern was Korra. While Pabu went for Mako, the polar bear dog helped her back onto her feet. She tried bending a fire blast but got nothing. "Ugh, I can't bend," she declared before trying it again. "I can't bend." "Calm down, it'll wear off," Mako told her as he stood back up and then helped Arashi up onto his feet. Who were those guys anyway? "Damn Equalists," Arashi muttered loudly as he went over to his knife had fallen and picked it up. But those words made no sense to Korra. "Huh? Those guys were Kai blockers," Mako explained. "They're Amon's henchmen." Now that she understood, but she also wanted to be sure. "That anti-bending guy with the mask?" she asked. "Yeah, he's the leader of the Equalists." "What do they want with the triple threats?" "Whatever it is, can't be good." He looked at the alleyway that the Equalists had escaped through. He groaned softly and briefly clutched his forehead. "Can't believe Bolan got himself into this mess." He groused before looking over at Arashi with a stink eye. "What were you two thinking?" "I went along to try and make sure nothing like this would have happened," the blonde protested. "It's not my fault that the Equalists showed up." He turned around and walked away a few steps, clearly not wanting to have this conversation. Korra went over to the firebender and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Mako, we are going to save your brother," she told him. "I promise you that. If it's any help, I think we have a trail to follow," Arashi announced, getting their attention. Both Mako and Korra went over to where he was and saw what he saw. A trail of blood that started at that spot and then went down the alley the Equalists had escaped through. "How did this happen?" Korra wondered aloud. "It must have been from the guy I cut." She looked at him like he had said something funny. "You cut the guy?" He held up his knife, a squat thing with bandages around the hilt and an open ring on the other end. "My Gigi taught me a little on how to use one of these things." His Gigi? That was a word she had never heard before. "My grandfather," he answered, putting the knife away. "So, are we just going to stand around here or are we going to get going?" They put the fire in their stomachs and they quickly got back on Naga. They followed the blood trail through the streets, intent on following it to the end. Unfortunately, they soon discovered that the blood trail ended. It seemed that the wounded Equalists had noticed the blood and took the time to fix it. That did not stop them. They rode throughout the city, trying to find Bolan and the other kidnapped benders. But as the hours wore on and the amount of places they searched grew, their hopes were beginning to diminish. "We've been out all night," Korra told Arashi and Mako when Naga finally came to a stop, panting with her tongue out. "No sign of him." "We've got to keep looking." "But where?" asked Mako. "Are there any places we haven't looked?" Arashi asked, sounding just as tired as they were. "No, we've been to every place we can think of." As Korra looked at the street ahead of them, an idea struck her with a gasp. "I have an idea," she told the two of them. "What is it?" the kid amongst them asked. She wordlessly urged Naga on, now heading for the park. By the time they had reached the water fountain, they were very tired. Naga and Pabu started drinking from the fountain and the riders climbed down from the saddle. "The first day I got into town, I ran into an Equalist protester over there," Korra finally explained to Mako and Arashi, pointing at the spot, despite the fact that it was empty at the moment. "And you think they'll know where Bolan is?" Mako asked her. "It's our only lead right now." "We'll just have to wait then," Arashi remarked. Once the animals were done drinking their fill of water, they all moved away from the fountain to beneath a tree. Naga rested against the tree herself while Pabu rested on the saddle. Korra and Mako sat in front of Naga's side, while Arashi was leaning against the side of her rump, more relaxed than the other two were. To Korra, the air around her and Mako was a little bit awkward, and it didn't help that she was curious about a few things. "So, why is Bolan running around with the triple threat triad, anyway?" she finally asked Mako. He had been quiet as they had waited, but when she asked that question, he became a little nervous. "Well, we used to do some work for them back in the day," he answered. "What?" she said, completely surprised by those words. "Why are you some kind of criminal?" For some weird reason, Arashi began to snicker. "No," Mako told her fiercely. "You don't know what you're talking about. I just ran numbers for them and stuff. We were orphans out on the street, I did what I had to do to survive and protect my little brother." Her anger burned out quickly once she heard that and she looked away. "I'm sorry. It must have been hard." She had been raised in comfort and security, not on the streets like they had been. "Can I ask what happened to your parents?" she asked, looking at him again. She had drawn the question out, unsure if it was something she should ask. "They were mugged by a firebender. He cut them down right in front of me." His eyes held sadness in them as he spoke those words. "I was 8. Mako, she didn't know what to say. She was the avatar and she didn't know what to say. But he clutched the red scarf he always wore tightly. Bolan's the only family I have left, he told her. If anything happened to him. We'll find him, Arashi told the firebender from where he sat. Both Mako and Korra looked over, but they couldn't see his face. Don't worry about it, Mako. We'll find him. Thanks, Arashi, he said. Why were you snickering before? Korra asked the blonde kid. He turned his head and looked over at her with a smirk on his face. I was snickering because Mako didn't just run numbers back then. He tried branching out into pickpocketing at one point. Oh, spirits take me now, Mako groaned aloud. But the tribeswoman's interest was aroused. At one point. She repeated. Yep, Arashi replied. Shady Shin had taught him how to do it and then told him to find a mark to pick. Unfortunately, Mako had made the mistake of trying to pickpocket my dad and got caught instantly. He tried running away and when that didn't work, he tried to fend off my dad with his firebending. He snorted. Like that would have worked. Arashi, I am well aware of the fact that Sazan Uzumaki wiped the floor with me, Mako told him a long-suffering voice, showing that they had had this conversation before. Yeah, but then when he realized what you were trying to do, he kicked Shin's ass and then treated you and Bolan to a hot meal. The next day, he shows up at the Triple Threat restaurant and he started giving you lessons in firebending, with my uncle helping along. The avatar amongst them just stared at Mako with a slack jaw. You tried to steal from Sazan Uzumaki? She asked him like she hadn't heard it right. He didn't answer, but Arashi did. Yep, and it's funny every time. He started laughing, only to stop when he got hit by Naga's tail. Ack. He yelped, surprised by the motion. He pushed the tail out of the way and looked hard at the polar bear dog. Would you watch where you're throwing that thing? She's sleeping, Arashi, Korra told him. Well, she still needs to be careful of where that thing is going. That thing is called her tail. I know what it's called. He gave the sleeping animal a look and then turned his attention to her. By the way, how did you get her? I thought polar bear dogs were wild animals that couldn't be tamed. He had asked her that question the day that they had met and that same hole was torn inside her. I found her when she was a pup, she answered. How? He asked, really curious. I don't really want to talk about it. Amon, Korra, Mako said to her. I shared my past with you guys. You can do the same. He had her there and they all knew it. So, she had to tell them. How I got Naga actually started about 2 years before when Akela showed up at the compound I was living in. Wait, Akela? Arashi repeated. As in the white wolf that was Sokka's companion Akela. Yeah, that was him. Why would he go there? I don't know. To go be with his friend's sister and granddaughter after he had died. She asked him with bitter sarcasm. The day that wolf had been found sitting on his haunches outside the gate of the compound and had been brought in, Katara had started crying. But it was her words that got his attention. Hold on, granddaughter. Yeah, she said. My mom is the daughter of Sokka and Suki. He just stared at her with a look of surprise. Clearly, he hadn't been expecting to hear something like that. It disappeared from his face quickly enough and he said, alright, continue. Thank you. So Akela had lived with us and went with me wherever I went. A sad smile crossed her lips at the memory of that big white wolf. She had thought he was great. He followed her and played with her, but he never bit her. I thought he would be my animal companion, like Appa was to Aang. But he was an old wolf and he kept getting more and more tired. Katara had told me that he wouldn't be long for this world, but I didn't want to hear it. And then. Mako repeated, just as interested as Arashi was. And then, one day in the middle of a blizzard, he went out of the compound and I went after him, despite the White Lotus trying to stop me. I didn't pay attention to the cold or the howling wind that obscured my eyes. I just wanted to find my friend and bring him back. Did you? That old familiar sadness welled up inside her. No, I lost sight of him in the blizzard. I hid in a cave to wait out the storm, and once inside, I found Naga there. She was a puppy who had lost her pack and was alone. Happiness came to her at the memory of the small polar bear dog shivering against her side in that cold cave. We shared body heat in the cave to keep warm while the blizzard went on outside. When the people from the compound found us, we had become fast friends and I took her with me when I went back. What about Akela? Arashi asked her. From what they told me, they had never found him. It was like he had simply disappeared. I used to think that he was still out on the tundra somewhere, still alive. I take it that you don't anymore? She shook her head sadly. No, I know better now. He's dead, that was probably why he went out into that blizzard in the first place. It had been her first brush with death and it was easy to say that she did not enjoy it. She didn't want that to happen to anyone else until Katara took her aside and told her that it will happen no matter what she might do. After a long talk, they shared tears in memory of Akela. In that moment, they weren't teacher and student but rather grand aunt and grand niece. Wanting to move past it, she looked back at the blonde amongst them. Tell me something, Arashi, she said to him. What is a son of Naruto Uzumaki doing with the triple threats? I would have thought he'd do something more honorable. But the just confused him. Huh? What are you talking about? My dad was an only child. Then how do you have an uncle? He's my uncle on my mother's side. My dad didn't just clone me. Then your mom was in the triple threats? No, that was my uncle's thing. My mom was a pro bender until she got married and had me. Mako chuckled a little. Shu Uzumaki, that woman was a great pro bender and had one of the fiercest rivalries you'd never expect. Korra swung her head over to look at him. Why is that? That rivalry was with Sazan Uzumaki, her future husband. They told me and Bolan all the stories. Back then, people didn't really go see pro bending for the matches, as they did to see Sazan and Shu battle it out against one another. Both firebenders and both at the top of the pro bending game, it drew in thousands. Wow, that sounds impressive. She would have liked to have seen that. Apparently, it was. And it wasn't just inside the ring. They got up into the other's face outside the ring too. It all came to a head at the championship match between the Porcupines and the Dragons. Is that the one where the Porcupines lost their streak? Yeah, and it was all thanks to my parents, Arashi told her. It was a match for the ages. By the time they got to the third round, both teams had a round apiece and only my mom and dad were left in the ring. So they had a tiebreaker fight and the Porcupines chose fire. Everyone was on the edge of their seats as the two of them dueled for the championship, some even calling it an Anikai. In the end, Dad won when he knocked Mom off the platform. That was when things had gotten interesting. While Dad had taken off his helmet and was waving to the crowds who cheered him on, Mom got back up onto her feet and walked over to him, taking her helmet off too and getting his attention. Everyone noticed this and thought that she was going to hit him in anger because she lost the match. Both teams were ready to restrain their respective teammates as the two of them stared down the other. But then Mom grabbed Dad by the face and pulled him into a kiss that stunned everyone who saw it. The next words that came out of her mouth after that were "You are so hot right now." Korra couldn't help but laugh at that. Seriously? She asked. That's what she did. Oh yeah, that's how my mom and dad went on their first date. Both he and Mako chuckled alongside her as she laughed. But when the laughing stopped, they all felt the tiredness that had been hounding them for the past couple of hours and fell asleep. Equality now. Equality now. We want equality now. A voice screamed inside Korra's ear, forcing her to wake up with an annoyed feeling. That feeling evaporated when she realized three things in rapid succession. 1. It was morning. 2. She had fallen asleep where she had sat. 3. She was currently using Mako as a headrest, which he was realizing just as she was. Her shout of surprise as they scrambled apart woke Arashi up. Huh? What's going on? He demanded, a little groggy. Nothing at all. Promised Korra. Then she took notice of the man standing on the platform nearby. That's the guy, she told the guys. It was the same man she had met her first day in Republic City, and he sounded just as annoying as he was the first time. Non-benders of Republic City. The man shouted out through the megaphone at the people passing by. Amon calls you to action. Take back your city. It's time for the. He trailed off with a surprised gasp when he saw Korra coming towards him with an annoyed scowl on her face. It's you again. He said before shouting at her with a megaphone. You cannot silence me, Avatar. She simply slapped the megaphone out of his hand, sending it crashing down to the ground and breaking into pieces. Shut your yapper and listen up. She ordered him. My friend got kidnapped by some Kai blockers. Where'd they take him? I have no idea what you're talking about, he said, crossing his arms and looking away from her. Oh, I think you do. She raised a leg and swung it down hard, bending the table he was standing on up into the air. Unfortunately, he got off before it went up. As it sailed upwards into the air, the papers that had been neatly stacked on it began to fall down to the ground in a gentle shower of sorts. While the man began picking up the ones that landed on the ground, Mako snagged one out from the air and looked at it. It was a picture of Amon with his hand outstretched, like he was reaching for something. Beneath the image were words. Witness the revelation tonight, 9 o'clock, he read aloud. Arashi had grabbed one too and read the same thing. What the hell is the revelation? He demanded of the man, who was still kneeling on the ground and still picking the papers up. Nothing that concerns the likes of you three, he spat out, only to have his collar grabbed by Korra and yanked up into the air. You better believe it concerns us, she told him. Spill it. A small look of fear crossed over his face at those words, and he began talking quickly. No one knows what the revelation is. And I have no idea what happened to your friend. But if he's a bender, then my bet is he's getting what's coming to him. Where's it happening? Mako demanded. The whistle pierced the air, and they all saw a cop coming towards them. Hey. What's going on over there? He shouted. The Avatar's oppressing us. Help. The protester shouted. Decidedly ignoring him, Korra tossed him aside and turned to look at Mako and Arashi. "Let's scram." "Good idea," Arashi said, already turning and running for Naga. Both he and Mako grabbed a few of the fallen papers before leaping up on the polar bear dog. Once aboard, they ran out of the park, fast enough to lose the cop. Once safely away, they stopped at a bench with a roof over it. Korra and Mako sat on the bench itself, while Arashi squatted down to look more closely at the papers. "Why didn't the Equalists put a location on these?" Korra asked. "If they did, it wouldn't be obvious," Arashi remarked. "Yeah, it's probably because they don't want just anyone waltzing into their big revelation, whatever that is," Mako said, at first mockingly and then dejectedly. He focused his attention back on the papers on the ground before him. "I bet the information is hidden on here somehow." "Gee, you think?" the blonde said sarcastically with a paper in his hand. When he idly flipped it over, he saw an image on the back, an image that looked rather familiar to him. "Hang on, isn't this the dock?" "What?" "This image right here, this is the dock on the western end of the city." He showed the image to the other two. Mako took the paper and looked at the other papers, flipping some over to see the backs. "There are 4 different images on these things," he finally said. "So, it's a puzzle?" Korra asked. "Yeah, of a map," he agreed. Grabbing 3 other papers that had a different image, he put them together to make the map. Taking notice of the official map of the city next to the bench, he stood up and started using the makeshift map to find where the location was, which was shown as a red dot on the makeshift map. It didn't take him long to find the right spot on the map. "Bingo, that must be where it's going down," he declared. "Then what are we doing just standing around here?" Korra asked. "We can't just walk right in there," Arashi told her. "Odds are we're going to have to be sneaky on this one." "You mean like disguises?" "Yeah, I guess." "Cool." It sounded like it was something out of her favorite series of books. Well, they didn't have to get outright disguises, they did need to get Korra a coat and a hat. She also borrowed Mako's scarf to make it look better. Mako bought a hat as well, and Arashi got one too, as well as a black vest, making him look a little like a newspaper boy. By the time they got to the place shown on the hidden map, night had fallen. They found themselves in an area that was nothing but warehouses and factories. They hid in an alleyway and watched as other people walked towards a particular building, the only one that had a guard out front. "This is the place," Mako declared. They all put on their hats on and started walking forward. Without warning, Korra came in closer to Arashi and put a protective hand around his shoulder. "Hey, wah." He started to shout, only to stop, take a breath, and whispered instead. "What are you doing?" "We'll attract less attention this way," she told him. He kept his gaze focused ahead, but she had thought she had seen something. "Are you blushing?" "Just focus on why we're here," he said, still looking forward. They walked up to the guard, a tall man who was also Heavisid and had arms that looked like they were the size of small tree trunks when crossed. "This is a private party," he told the 3 of them as they came closer. "No one gets in without an invitation." "An invitation?" repeated Korra. He looked at them with suspicion at those words, until Mako pulled one of the papers they had grabbed out from his pocket. "You mean this?" he asked, holding it up. The guard took the paper, looked at it, and then smiled at the 3 of them. "The revelation is upon us, my brothers and sister." He stepped out of the way and they walked through the door. "That was close," Arashi said underneath his breath as they entered the building. "Nice thinking, Mako." "Thanks," Mako said in reply. As they went further in, Korra's hand left the blonde's shoulder. He was a little disappointed, but didn't let it overwhelm him. They were there to find Bolan and his uncle. They followed the sounds of people talking to a large room that had a stage at the other end. Hanging on the back wall of the stage was a poster of Amon and 2 banners that held the symbol and sign of the Equalists, one on each side of the banner. Between the stage and the entrance, there were a lot of people, enough to make Arashi say, "Holy shit." "I knew that a lot of people hated benders, but I've never seen so many in one place," Mako said as the 3 of them looked down at the large crowd of people. There were enough there to make up a small army. "Keep your eyes out for Bolan," he told Korra and Arashi before they went down the nearby stairs and into the crowd. As they made their way forward towards the stage, the lights came to life and shined down on the stage. An announcer began speaking in a loud voice, saying, "Please welcome your hero, your savior Amon." The trapdoor on the stage pulled back and Amon, along with 7 Equalists, including one who wasn't wearing the standard uniform, marking him as a possible higher rank, came up out of the floor amidst cheers from the crowd. The light shined down on Amon specifically, and Korra got a good look at him. She had thought he looked strange on the papers, but in real life, that strangeness turned to intimidation. His hooded jacket covered his head, leaving only his face to be seen by the crowd. And that face was covered by a mask that looked vaguely like a face, with mouth and 2 eye sockets. High on the forehead was a red circle, like the ones on the masks of the Equalists. The jacket looked like it was padded enough to be armor if the need ever came. He walked forward to a microphone standing on the stage and waited for the cheering to die down a little. Then he began to speak. "My quest for equality began many years ago," he said, taking the microphone off the stand and into his hand. "When I was a boy, my family and I lived on a small farm. We weren't rich and none of us were benders. This made us very easy targets for the firebender who extorted my father. One day, my father confronted the man. That firebender took my family from me. Then, he took my face." He turned to look at the crowd so that they could see the mask fully. The implication set in and made everyone gasp in shock. "I've been forced to hide behind the mask ever since," he told them all. "As you know, the Avatar has recently arrived in Republic City." Those words made everyone around Korra, minus Mako and Arashi, start booing loudly. "And if she were here, she would tell you that bending brings balance to the world. But, she is wrong. The only thing bending has brought to the world is suffering. It has been the cause of every war in every era." He pointed at the crowd to emphasize his point, making Korra grit her teeth in anger. "But that is about to change." He placed the microphone back on the stand and faced the crowd. "I know you have been wondering, what is the revelation? You're about to get your answer. Since the beginning of time, the spirits have acted as guardians of our world and they have spoken to me. They said the Avatar has failed humanity and that the Paragons have failed to correct this." Those words drew fury from Korra and Arashi, but he kept speaking. "That is why the spirits have chosen me to usher in a new era of balance. They have granted me a power that will make equality a reality. The power to take a person's bending away. Permanently," he declared. Amidst the gasps of surprise in the crowd, Korra's eyes widened in horror at the thought. "That's impossible," she told the other two, keeping her voice down. "There's no way. This guy's insane," Mako agreed. Arashi didn't say anything and when they looked over at him, they saw that he had gone pale and he was looking at the stage with shock and terror in his eyes. He was also trembling in place. "Arashi, you okay?" the firebender asked him quietly. He didn't say anything, but Amon did. "Now, for a demonstration," he said, turning to the side of the stage, where a group of people bound in rope were forced on stage. "Please welcome Lightning Bolt Zolt, leader of the Triple Threat Triad and one of the most notorious criminals in Republic City." The man with gray hair and expensive red and gold clothing sneered at the booing crowd with disdain in his eyes. "Ah, boo yourselves," he told them. His words seemed to snap Arashi out of the trembling state he was in. "That's my uncle," he declared, his voice lost in the booing. He took a step forward only to be stopped by Korra. "Hey. Hold on, would ya?" she told him. Her eyes were focused on the stage, where the other bound people were being forced to kneel down. "There's Bolan," she declared, looking at her friend kneeling at the end of the row with frightened expression on his face. This time, she was the one who tried moving forward only to have Mako grab hold of her. "Wait, we can't fight them all," he told her as he pulled her back. "We need to be smart about this. Then come up with a game plan, team captain," she told him pointedly. "Zolt has amassed a fortune by extorting and abusing non-benders," Amon announced for all to hear. "But his reign of terror is about to come to an end. Now, in the interest of fairness, I will give Zolt the chance to fight to keep his bending." The triad leader's binds were undone and the two were given a bit of room. But Zolt didn't seem to care. "Yeah right, you think I'm actually going to fight a schmuck like you?" he asked Amon with a careless tone of arrogance. "Tell you what, you name your price, I'll pay it and we both forget that you were ever this stupid." "Damn it, uncle, this isn't a wannabe punk trying to infringe on your turf," Arashi muttered, looking right at the stage. "This guy is serious." "My price, as you call it, is for you to lose your bending," Amon told Zolt, his voice never changing its tone. "And if you refuse, I am sure we can find others." While others might have found it odd that he used those words, it had the effect he wanted. It sent Zolt off into a rage. "You stay away from my nephew," he bellowed, instantly throwing fireballs at the masked man. If Amon had been surprised by this action, he did not show it. Instead he dodged the fireballs while also making his way forward to the triad leader. Seeing how fire wasn't cutting, Zolt lived up to his name and threw lightning. But Amon dodged a bolt, grabbed his hand, forced Zolt around and onto his knees. As the lightning arced upwards, destroyed the part of the roof it was hitting, Amon placed one hand on Zolt's neck to stop him from moving and placed the other on his head, with his thumb pressing down hard on the forehead. Zolt stiffened and a strangled gasp weakly breathed out from his mouth. As the seconds crawled onward, the lightning began to falter and diminish. It was quickly replaced by a brilliant plume of fire, only for the same thing to happen to the fire too, vanishing in a matter of seconds. It happened all too quickly and all too slow. Once the fire had vanished, Amon released his hold on Zolt, letting him fall to the ground. The leader of the Triple Threat Triad struggled get back up, only to then try and bend fire at the man. But as his fist flew through, there was no flame, not even a spark. He fell back down again. "Wow, what did you do to me?" He asked Amon after supporting himself on his hands and knees. The arrogance he had was gone. Your firebending is gone. Forever, Amon declared, drawing gasps of surprise and awe from the crowd. The era of bending is over. A new era of equality has begun. The crowd began to cheer and clap while another bound bender was selected and pushed forward, his bindings gone. There goes Shady Shin, Arashi said, coming out of his silence as the waterbender faced Amon. He couldn't say he wasn't happy to see the waterbender in a position like this. Any ideas yet? Asked Korra, looking at Mako. I think so, he answered, looking at the wall to their left. See those machines? They're powered by water and steam. If you can create some cover, Arashi and I can grab Bolan without anyone seeing. Then, we duck out of here. We are also getting my uncle, Arashi said in a firm voice. The look he gave both of them showed that he would have no argument about it. Fine, I'll grab Bolan, you grab Zolt. Works for me, Korra said. Good luck, you two. Same for you, Mako told her. He and the blonde moved forward into the crowd, getting closer to the stage. She went to the side and found a doorway. Once she was sure that no one had seen her, she went through. She lucked out when she found the machine that controlled the water and steam pressure. Quickly reading the warnings on the wall above the machine, she grabbed hold of the big red wheel and spun it around, releasing the pressure. But only a little pressure was released. It's not enough, she muttered, reaching for the small red wheel, releasing the pressure there too. Hey, you, the voice of the door guard said, prompting her to turn around and look at him. Is there a problem, my brother? She asked him as he came closer. What are you doing back here? He asked back. Looking for the bathroom. She cracked an innocent-looking smile, but he didn't buy it. He pulled out a wrench and started swinging at her. The smile disappeared as she dodged him. It soon became clear to her that while he might have a little training with a weapon, it wasn't enough to stop him swinging wildly. He hit the machine and the pipes more than her while she avoided even getting hit. She pulled Mako's scarf off of her neck and held it out. When the guard's wrench came swinging, she caught his hand with the scarf and used his own momentum to throw him into the pipes coming out of the machine. Thanks, she told him as he fell unconscious to the ground and a lot of steam came flowing out of the broken pipes. This should be enough. Mako and Arashi could only wait while the second to last bender had been struck down by Amon. The last bender left was Bolan and they still couldn't move in. What's taking her? Arashi demanded as Bolan was freed and pushed forward. Hello, Amon, sir, Mako's brother began talking as the masked leader of the Equalists turned to face him. I think there's been a big misunderstanding. Amon didn't say anything in reply, he only moved forward to the earthbender. An explosion came out from the nearby wall, rocking the room with a sound. As steam began to fill the room, people started screaming and running in fear. Soon, they could barely see what was in front of their faces. Amon let the smoke engulf him and then moved away from sight of the crowd. He stopped when he heard a voice cry out, "Uncle." Turning his head to the sound, he could barely see a blonde leap onto the stage and race for Zolt. "Kid?" said Zolt. "Yeah, it's me. Come on, we gotta go." The leader of the Equalists watched in silence as the two vague figures in the smoke faded away, the larger one being supported by the smaller one. But he knew who the kid was. Snapping his fingers once, an Equalist member appeared by his side in an instant. "Zolt has someone trying to get him away. Stop them," he ordered. "As you command," the member replied, vanishing into the smoke. Meanwhile, Bolan was stranded in the smoke with no idea what to do. He stepped back away from what he thought was the edge of the stage. Out of nowhere, he felt someone grabbed hold of him and tried pulling him away. He yelped in surprise and tried to struggle free, only to have the grip disappear. He turned and saw Mako standing there and throwing the Equalist who had held him into the air. "Bolan, you alright?" his brother asked. "Yes. Mako. I love you," he declared, moving forward for a hug. Instead, Mako grabbed hold of him and dragged him off the stage. "Come on, we need to get out of here." "Wait." He got himself out of the hold and moved in front of him. "I saw an exit just behind the stage before they brought us out. Follow me." Mako did follow his brother through the smoke to the door. The sight of the city was a relief to their eyes once they were outside on a platform with a ladder, their only option to go down on. Bolan looked over the railing to see how far it was down to the ground. "I see Arashi," he announced, seeing the blonde trying to fight off an Equalist while Zolt was sitting against a wall, barely conscious. "We need to get down there," Mako told his brother, seeing the same thing he was. Bolan started down the ladder first and he followed. But as they climbed, the man who Bolan had heard referred to as the lieutenant appeared above them. Before either of them could do anything, he drew his clubs and struck the ladder with them. Lightning coursed through the clubs and onto the ladder, striking them hard and fast. They both screamed in pain and in doing so, released the grip they had on the ladder, falling to the ground below. "Nice to see you guys drop in." Arashi remarked while trying to fend off the Equalist fighting him, finally succeeding with a hard kick to the crotch. The lieutenant leapt down from the platform with his clubs raised to strike, aiming for the bending brothers. But they recovered enough to leap out of the way and get back on their feet. "Arashi, get out of here," Mako told the blonde. "No way," he said instantly. "I'm not leaving you guys. Then I'll take you down first," the lieutenant said, leaping for him with his clubs high. Arashi rolled to the side and threw his knife at him, making him turn away from it. He turned away even more when Mako bent a blast of fire at him. Changing course, he went for the firebender. For a couple of moments, the two of them fought, but the lieutenant knocked him down quickly enough with his clubs. The sound of earth being torn up from the ground got his attention. He turned to see a large chunk of the street in a rough disc shape being bended by Bolan, who threw it at him. He dodged it and dodged the next one being thrown at him. Then he charged Bolan, intent on putting him down. The earthbender panicked somewhat when he saw him coming and bent a wall up from the ground to protect himself. But the lieutenant simply flipped over the wall, landed on the other side right in front of Bolan, and struck him down with the clubs. Mako and Arashi came from behind the different sides of the makeshift wall, Mako coming in high with fire and Arashi coming in low for a tackle. The lieutenant brushed the fire aside and then knocked Arashi into the wall before he could even try to tackle. The blonde hit the makeshift wall hard, causing it to crash down. As he lay there, he saw his uncle getting back up to his feet. "Uncle, run. Get away and find some place safe," he urged Zolt, who nodded only once before hobbling quickly away down a different alley. The sound of electricity going off and Mako groaning loudly in pain got the blonde's attention, making him turn to see the lieutenant pinning the firebender to the actual wall with his clubs. Once he was done, he let the bender fall to the ground in a heap. "You benders need to understand, there's no place in the world for you anymore," he told the three of them. The street suddenly rose up in a jut, knocking him into the wall hard. As he fell to the ground, he lost his grip on the clubs and they went flying. His body overflowing with pain, he looked to see the Avatar standing just across from him, without her disguise. "I wouldn't count us out just yet," she told him before he collapsed again. She whistled and called out, "Naga." The polar bear dog came running at the sound of the whistle, coming down a nearby flight of stairs and right towards as she helped Mako back onto his feet. The two of them, along with Arashi, who stood shakily up on his own, climbed onto her back. More Equalists appeared on the platform and started leaping down to the ground. "We need to go now," Arashi said urgently, sitting on the far back again. Korra couldn't have agreed more and urged Naga forward. As the polar bear dog started running, Bolan sat back up and saw her coming right at him. He screamed in panic, but the only thing she did was grab him by the scruff of his shirt with her jaws and kept running. That didn't really work for him, as he kept bobbing up and down with her movements. "Ha. Oh. Yeah. Stop. I want to be on your back, please," he told Naga every time he moved. "Trust me. It's not any better up here," Arashi shouted at him from where he sat. "The Avatar," the lieutenant told the Equalists coming his way as the polar bear dog got further away. "That's her." They were ready to chase after her, only to stop when Amon spoke. "Let her go," he commanded from atop the platform, making them all stop. "She's the perfect messenger to tell the city of my power, her and the blonde child with her." Location: Air Temple Island. Tenzin was worried for Korra, having not seen her for the past day. He was consulting with the White Lotus on how to find her when she came walking up to him with Arashi in tow. "Thank goodness," he said to them as he came towards them. "I was about to send out a search party. Are the two of you alright?" Korra shook her head and looked away from him, out across the banister she leaned against and towards the city. "What happened?" he asked her. "Did you find your friend?" "Yes," but she began to say, only to stop. Arashi didn't say anything, he just gave her a sharp nudge to make her continue. "We were at an Equalist rally," she told Tenzin, looking at him. "We saw Amon." "What?" he said, surprised by the news. "He can take people's bending away, for good. That's impossible. Only the Avatar has ever possessed that ability. He had seen his father use it a few times. It was enough to make him remember it. But we saw him do it," she told him before looking at the blonde beside her, who was staring down at the water below. "Arashi, tell him." He didn't say anything but Tenzin did. "I believe you," he assured her calmly. He turned to look at the city. "I don't know how Amon achieved this power, but this means the revolution is more dangerous than ever. No bender is safe." Then he looked over at the one person who hadn't spoken. "Arashi, are you okay?" The blonde turned and gave the airbending master a single look. Then he walked away, heading for the temple. Both Korra and Tenzin watched in silence as he went. Ever since they had escaped from the Equalists, Arashi had not said a word to Korra. Normally, she wouldn't think anything of it. But she kept getting reminded of when she saw Zolt lose his bending and the look that had appeared on Arashi's face when it happened. It was a mixture of horror, fear, shock, and questioning. She was asleep in her bed with the moonlight shining down on her through the open window, the hinges creaking slightly from the small gust of wind. Suddenly, she came awake, sitting up quickly and throwing her sheets off. She had felt a presence beyond her room, and it had woken her up. It was just in time as an Equalist broke through the window and two more burst through the door, shattering both. She leapt off the bed and bent fire at them all. They all leapt out of the way of the flame and spread out, surrounding her. While two distracted her, making her throw furious bursts of fire at them, one got in close and jabbed several points on her side. Losing all feeling in her body, she fell to her knees with a pained shout. She would have fallen completely had the Equalist behind her not held her up with his knee. Hearing footsteps coming closer and closer, she looked up and saw with horror that Amon stood there before her. "After I take your bending away, you will be nothing," he declared ominously, his hand stretching out for her face. There was nothing she could do as the hand reached for her. She came awake with a shout, still in her bed. It was just a nightmare, but it had been so real to her. She could feel the cold sweat coming down her forehead and she could not control her breathing. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. It wasn't real, she kept telling herself, over and over and over again. But it just made her remember even more and she didn't want to remember. Feeling a cold and wet sensation against her right hand, she turned to see Naga licking it. That was how she knew she was awake, Naga was there. It's all right, Naga," she told the polar bear dog as she put her head in her lap. "I just had a bad dream." She petted Naga's head as she spoke and then cradled it, using it like a lifeline to the reality she was in. Then all of a sudden, a loud scream pierced the air, snapping her out of the state she was in. "What was that?" she demanded, getting out of the bed and going into the hall. The scream came again, much more loudly now. But she could tell where it coming from, just down the hall. More importantly, it was coming from Arashi's room, and it was Arashi who was screaming. She bolted down the hall to his room, thinking that he was being tortured or something close to it. But when she opened the door to his room, she saw that he was twisting around in his bed, trapped in a dream. "No. No. Stop it. Stop burning," he cried in a pained little voice as he twisted and turned. "Help. Help. Please. Someone." "Arashi," said Korra, going to his side. "Wake up. It's just a dream." She sat on the edge of the bed and grabbed hold of him to make him stop moving around. It worked like a charm. He stopped moving like he was trying to escape from something. He opened his eyes and looked around the room, looking for something. Then those eyes settled on her. "Mama?" he asked in a small voice, his breathing erratic and loud. The tribeswoman was caught off guard by that question, not expecting it in the least. "Arashi, it's me," she began to say to him. But she didn't get any further than that. He sat up and then went for her, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his head into her side. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said as tears began to leak out of his eyes, staining her shirt. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean to. I promised I didn't mean to let it happen. I lost her. I'm so sorry." Uncertain of what she was supposed to do and having no idea of what he was talking about, she tried to do something her mother had done for her when she had been a little kid. "Shush now, it's alright," she told him gently, rubbing his back with a calm hand. "Mama's here. I'm right here." The tears stopped somewhat, but he would not let go of her. He hung on to her like she was his last lifeline to this reality. It was a sight that was new to the Avatar, and quite frankly, it scared her deeply. Arashi was a somewhat loud, somewhat sarcastic kid who didn't take any crap from anyone, but was also loyal to his friends. He had a confident aura about him that didn't seem to take a hit whenever something was thrown at him. But it turns out she was wrong about that assumption, and she was wishing at that moment that she hadn't been wrong. The confidence was gone, and now, she was looking at a scared little boy who only wanted his mother to help him chase the nightmare away. But instead, he had her. Well, if it was going to be like that, she would try her best. She didn't know how long she sat there with his arms around her waist, his face buried in her side, and her rubbing his back, but eventually his sobbing began to lessen, and he fell asleep. But he still hung on to her, so she sat on the bed and stroked his back slowly. To her, it felt like her own worries weren't the matter, for the moment at least. Before long, the door opened and Pima stood there. "I see you've got here first," she remarked with a gentle smile. "I'm sorry," Korra apologized, looking a little embarrassed at being caught like this. "I just heard him scream and you came running to see what was happening," she finished knowingly. The Avatar nodded silently. "Has this happened before?" she asked, feeling like an idiot as soon as the words left her mouth. If Pima could describe what would happen after he screamed, why wouldn't have it happened before? Tenzin's wife nodded, walking quietly over to her. She reached down and gently pried Arashi's grip off of Korra's waist, letting her stand up from the bed. The blonde made a small noise at the loss of contact, but she tucked him in and he fell silent. The two women walked quietly out of the room, closing the door behind them once they were out. Is he going to be okay? Korra asked Pima once they were out. He will be fine. But he'll probably deny anything that he did in there later on. He doesn't like letting people see that side of him, not even people who are close to him. Pima, he kept calling me his mother, begging for something to stop burning, and that he had lost someone. What happened to him? He was most likely dreaming of the night his family died. But other than that, it's not my place to tell his story. She looked at the avatar with concern on her face. But now, what were you doing up, Korra? You're usually a heavy sleeper. It's nothing, she said instantly. I just had a hard sleeping. Good night. Good night, Korra. Both turned away and went back to their own beds, staying there for the rest of the night and trying to get some sleep with various degrees of success. Location: City Hall. There is a madman running around our beloved city, threatening to tear it apart, Terlock, the representative of the Northern Water Tribe to the United Republic Council, said from where he sat across from Tenzin inside City Hall. They sat on the ends of a U-shaped table, and between them sat the representatives for the Fire Nation, the Earth Kingdom, and the Southern Water Tribe. This was a normal meeting between the five of them, and the first order of business was the Equalists and Amon. We need to create a task force whose sole mission is to find Amon, bring him to justice. Absolutely not, Tenzin instantly objected. A move that aggressive would only further divide benders and non-benders. They would start hearing rumors and whispers of the council abusing its authority if they did that. Terlock, I'm inclined to agree with your proposal, the Fire Nation representative told the northern tribesman. But who would head up such a task force? In response, he stood up from his chair. It would be my honor and privilege to accept such a duty, he declared with a bowed head. He looked like the very model of a humble civil servant, but Tenzin knew him better than that. This is just one of your ploys to gain more power, isn't it? He accused the tribesman, who lifted his head back up. All I'm trying to do is help, he said in slight protest. Think back, 42 years ago, Republic City was threatened by another dangerous man, Yakin. Your father wasn't afraid to face him head-on, he told Tenzin, pointing at him with a finger. That drew the airbender's ire immediately. This is a completely different situation, and how dare you compare yourself to Avatar Ong? He shouted, standing up from his chair and pointing at him with an angry finger. The man was no avatar, he was not the one to put himself in that position. But Terlock hardened his gaze and his tone. Amon is not going to stop with the bending triads, he told Tenzin. Eventually, he will come for all us benders. Our friends, our families, he emphasized. For all we know, he's been active for far longer than we had thought and is only now coming into the spotlight. What are you talking about, Terlock? The Fire Nation representative asked him. I'm talking about your predecessor, Councilman Uzumaki. The room went silent as that word entered their eardrums and dived deep into their memories. We all know how he and his family died, despite the story we've given to the press. It's very likely that Amon was the one to have done it. He looked at the council. Vote for this task force and I will stop Amon before it's too late. All in favor? He asked, raising his hand. The representative of the Fire Nation raised her hand, and after a moment, so did the representatives of the Earth Kingdom and the Southern Water Tribe. The decision passed. Terlock banged the gavel he had on the block in front of him. Then he smiled triumphantly at Tenzin, who only narrowed his gaze at him in reply. Location: Air Temple Island. Ah, I love this music, Korra declared as she practiced the airbending moves she had been shown outside on the courtyard, listening to jazz music coming from the radio set on the banister. It's completely relaxing. After a day of pro-bending training and learning how to airbend, or trying to learn how to airbend, this was the perfect way to unwind, outside and under the night sky. You can say that again, Arashi said from where he sat on the banister, right beside the radio. He was swaying a little in time with the music. It's completely relaxing. He stopped swaying and gave her a look. Just because I said you could say that again, doesn't mean you have to say it again. She just turned her head and grinned at him. The music coming from the radio began turning to static for no reason, making them both look at it with a curious look. But when Amon's voice came on, that curiosity was replaced by a sense of fear and dread. Good evening, my fellow Equalists, this is your leader, Amon, he began. As you have heard, the Republic Council has voted to make me public enemy number 1, proving once again that the bending oppressors of this city will stop at nothing to quash our revolution. But we cannot be stopped. Our numbers grow stronger by the day. You no longer have to live in fear. The time has come for benders to experience fear. Korra stared wide-eyed at the radio, beads of sweat trickling down her forehead even after his voice vanished and the music came back on. It reminded her of the nightmare she had last night, the one that made her sleep fitfully for the rest of the night. Even the jazz music wasn't helping any. It just sounded like noise now. Then the music died and she looked at Arashi, who had turned it off. "He's not here, Korra," he told her, jumping down from the banister to the ground and walking over to her. "He only does this kind of thing because he's afraid to show his face in public. People like him, if you take away the mask, whatever power they have dies. He knows that, that's why he hides." "How do you know that?" she asked him, looking down at his hand placed on her arm, letting her know he was trying to comfort her. "Gigi taught me a little bit about people like that," he answered. "Wow." She was a little impressed. "Lord Naruto sounds a little cool." "Lord Naruto?" he repeated with a look. "Why the hell are you calling him a lord?" "He's the paragon of the Fire Nation," she reminded him. "I think that deserves a little respect." He just shrugged his shoulders. "If you say so," he told her, taking his hand off her arm. "Oh, and by the way, my uncle was found." Now that was news to her. Zolt hadn't been seen since they had escaped from the Equalists. "Where is he?" "In the slammer," he answered. She frowned confusedly. She knew that she wasn't from the city and she was trying to make sure she knew what people were trying to say, but that one slipped past her. "Huh?" He rolled his eyes. "The cops found him a couple of hours after the whole revelation thing went down. Apparently, he turned himself into them." "Why?" "I don't know, he didn't tell me." "Then how do you know that he's in jail?" "I read it in the newspaper, duh." She rolled her eyes back at him, which made him laugh a little. It was enough to make her start laughing, and soon enough, their laughter was echoing off into the air. Then the laughter died away. Korra looked at the blonde and was struck by an image of him last night. "Arashi, about last night," she began. The cheer on his face disappeared faster than she could blink. "Drop it, Korra," he ordered her. "Drop it and never bring it up again." She was taken aback at how cold and angry he had suddenly become when she spoke about it. She shouldn't have brought it up. "Sorry," she said, a little nervous at the face he was giving her. He didn't say anything in reply. He just turned and walked away. Location: Mako. Finally, the shift is over, he thought to himself as he walked out of the power plant, flipping his scarf over his shoulder. It had been a long shift and he felt tired. He had started working at the power plant as a generator charger in order to pay for the ante for the Memorial Championship. He was making some decent money, but he knew that there wasn't going to be enough for the ante in time. But still, a decent pay was a decent pay and it would help out once the season was over. He heard the ringing of the trolley bell, signaling that it was almost ready to leave. Seeing that the tram was on the other side of the road, he started running towards it. But as he passed the Satomobile beside him, he saw someone on a moped coming at him and trying to stop too late. Caught off guard, he shouted in surprise as he was hit and sent flying back to the ground, landing hard. "Oh no." The driver of the moped said as it came to a stop. She got off and quickly ran over to him. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you." "How could you not see me?" he demanded while rubbing his head and making sure that nothing was damaged. He looked up at her and continued with, "I mean I was just." He trailed off at the end of his sentence and his cheek sprouted a blush. The reason for that was very simple. He had been hit a beautiful woman. She had pulled her helmet off and swept her long, black hair free, letting it flow in the air for a moment before settling down against her. She wore purple eyeshadow that went perfectly with her green eyes and she had chosen probably the best shade of red lipstick. All of a sudden, he felt like an idiot. Wow," he tried to say, only not getting anywhere. He coughed and then tried again. "I was still not getting anywhere," he tried clearing his throat to see if that would help any. "Are you okay?" she asked him, going to his side, clutching his arm. "Did I hurt you?" "Ugh, I am such an idiot." She helped him stand back up on his own feet. Having recovered enough to speak coherent sentences, he told her, "Don't worry, I'm fine." He wiped some street dust off of his arms and sleeves with a little nonchalance. "My brother hits me harder than that every day in practice." She looked at him a little harder after hearing that. "Wait, I recognize you. You're Mako, right? You play for the Fire Ferrets." "Yeah, that's me." She placed a hand on her face. "I am so embarrassed." She tucked her helmet under the crook of her arm and held her hand to shake. "My name is Asami," she introduced herself as they shook. "Let me make this up to you somehow. How about I treat you to dinner? Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, Kuang's cuisine," she decided. To say that Mako was surprised by the offer would have been a small understatement. Kuang's," he repeated as she went back to her moped. He knew of the place and that made him a little nervous. "I don't have any clothes nice enough for a place that classy." "I'll take care of that. All you need to do is show up," she assured him as she put her helmet back on and placed her goggles over her eyes. "So it's a date?" Yeah, I guess so," he agreed. "I'll see you tomorrow night." She started up her moped and drove past him, glancing back at him once more before turning her head away. As he watched grow smaller in the distance, he turned away and sprouted a goofy-looking grin on his face. At that moment, he felt like the luckiest guy on the planet. But he also forgot that the tram was leaving. Location: Air Temple Island. Korra and Arashi sat by one another at the table. The sun was setting outside and it was time for food. Tenzin took his seat, looked at everyone there, clasped his hands together and began the prayer with a bowed head. We are grateful for this delicious food, for happiness, for compassion, and… I'm not interrupting, am I? Terlock interrupted from where he stood at the entrance to the dining room. Korra looked up to see who it was and saw a fellow tribesman with clothes nice enough to show that he had earned enough money to buy them. This is my home, Terlock, Tenzin told him as he walked in, standing up from his seat. We're about to eat dinner. Good, because I am absolutely famished. He cast a sly look at the airbending master. Airbenders never turn away a hungry guest, am I right? I suppose, he conceded with a defeated sigh, sitting back down. When he looked over at Pima and saw the scowl she had on her face, all he could do was raise his hands up in slight surrender, saying that he had no control over the situation. Terlock walked over to the other side of the table, where the two non-air nomads were sitting. Ah, you must be the famous Avatar Korra, he said as he looked upon her. It is truly an honor. He turned his gaze on Arashi. And Arashi Uzumaki, I had the pleasure of serving alongside your father when he represented the Fire Nation. I don't if you remember, but I had come over to your house for dinner sometimes. You're right, I don't remember, Arashi said. Well, allow me to reintroduce myself. He bowed slightly with a hand on his heart. I am Councilman Terlock, representative from the Northern Water Tribe. Nice to meet you, Korra said in greeting, standing up and bowing to him. They sat down together, with Arashi on the other side. Unfortunately for Terlock, he sat down right next to Ikki, who leaned closer to him and began asking questions like, why do you have 3 ponytails? And how come you smell like a lady? You're weird. Well, aren't you precocious, he said in reply, pausing so he would say the right word. Hey, Runt, can we eat before you decide to play the information game? Arashi asked Ikki pointedly. I was just asking, she told him with a pout. So, the tribesman said, turning to the tribeswoman as she ate. I've been reading about your adventures in the papers. Infiltrating Amon's rally, now that took some real initiative, he told her. She wasn't the only one who went there, Arashi said to him before Korra could reply. He cast the blonde a look. Well, I am sure that you were there too. I believe it is safe to say that she pulled most of the weight in that action. It wouldn't do well to put yourself on a higher pedestal than where you actually are, Arashi. He smiled as he spoke, but it was obvious that he had just insulted the blonde. Thanks, by the way, Korra said, breaking what she felt was the beginning of a tense and awkward silence. I think you're the first authority figure in the city who's happy I'm here. Granted that the only other authority figures she had met were Tenzin and Chief Bifong, but it still counted. Republic City is much better off now that you've arrived, he assured her. Enough with the flattery, Terlock, Tenzin told him firmly. What do you want from Korra? Patience, Tenzin. I'm getting to that. He turned his attention back to the Avatar. As you may have heard, I am assembling a task force that will strike at the heart of the revolution, and I want you to join me. Really? She asked. What? Said Tenzin, having not expected that. I need someone who will help me attack Amon directly, someone who is fearless in the face of danger, Terlock told Korra. And that someone is you. Join your task force? She repeated. She was surprised to hear such an offer for her. But there was a tiny little voice telling her to refuse. And she heeded it. I can't. Her answer had caught Terlock, Tenzin, and even Arashi by surprise. They had all thought that she would accept such an offer in a heartbeat, the northern tribesmen had been betting on it. I must admit I'm rather surprised, Terlock said, uncertainty clouding his words at that moment. I thought you'd jump at the chance to help me lead the charge against Amon. Me too, Tenzin said, mostly to himself. Korra was the kind of person to jump right into things the moment they presented themselves. But at the moment, she seemed hesitant. Something was going on with her. I came to Republic City to finish my Avatar training with Tenzin, Korra explained to the tribesman sitting next to her. Right now, I just need to focus on that. Which is why this opportunity is perfect, he insisted. You would get on-the-job experience while performing your Avatar duty to the city. Are you deaf? Arashi asked him with a hard look. She said no. It's time for you to go, Terlock, Tenzin said to his fellow councilman pointedly before he could say anything in response to the blonde. The northern tribesman fixed the airbender with a brief look and then raised a hand in surrender. Very well, he conceded as he stood up from the table. But I'm not giving up on you just yet, he said to Korra, wagging his finger slightly. You'll be hearing from me soon. It has been a pleasure, Avatar Korra. He bowed to her again before leaving. Bye-bye, ponytail man. Called out Ikki as he left the room. All she got in response was a grunt. Oh dear, Pima said with an annoyed look on her face. What is it, Pima? Tenzin asked her. That man comes into my home saying that he is famished and doesn't even a single piece of the meal. That is really rude of him. Location. Mako. When he had stood in front of probably the fanciest restaurant in Republic City, he felt really out of his league. But he had taken a breath and stepped inside. It turned out to be the better course of action than to turn tail and run. He had been greeted by a waiter who had addressed him as Master Mako and led him into a side room. In that room, he had been given new clothes and his hair had been tamed. Within a few short minutes, he had gone from looking like a guy with an hourly wage to looking like a young gentleman who could fit in with high society. The only he had kept from his usual clothes had been the scarf. There was no way he would part with that. Once he was all dressed up, he was led up to the dining floor and to his table, where Asami was waiting for him, a red dress that left her arms bare and was just the right color of red for her. He sat down and as music played overhead, they began talking. "I am such a big pro bending fan," she told him. "I caught all of your matches this season." "All of them?" he repeated, surprised that she had said that. "Wow. Honestly, there were a few I wish you hadn't seen." "Oh, don't be ridiculous, you're amazing," she chided him lightly. "I can't wait to see you play in the memorial tournament." Like someone had flipped a switch inside of him, his good mood vanished. "Yeah, well, maybe next year," he said, his eyes looking down and away from her. "What do you mean?" she asked. "You made it in. It just isn't in the cards for us right now." He hated saying that, it felt like a punch to the stomach every time. But he had to face the facts. She leaned forward and placed her hand on his, a look of concern on her face. "Tell me," she told him. "What's the problem?" He could hear the earnestly in her voice as she spoke. "We don't have enough money to ante up for the championship pot. So, it looks like we're out of the running." "That's not fair," she protested quietly. He agreed with her, but what could he or his teammates do about it? The waiter came to their table with a covered plate in each hand. "Pardon me, Ms. Sato. Your main course," he said to Asami as he put the plates on the table and lifted their covers off, revealing food that looked quite good. Mako was shocked by what he had heard the waiter say. "Ms. Sato?" he repeated to Asami as the waiter walked away. "You wouldn't happen to be related to Hiroshi Sato, creator of the Satomobile?" "Yeah," she answered with a shrug of her shoulders. "He's my dad." "That out of town?" He swore. He could have gone with something a bit more descriptive and/or profane, but he was with a lady. "I'm serious," she said with a little smile. "You want to meet him? Meet the most successful captain of industry in all of Republic City?" he asked. "Yeah, I'll take you up on that." "Okay then. Shall we eat?" "Yeah, let's," he answered with a smile. Location. Air Temple Island. "Hello, fellow teammate and coach." Bolan called out to Korra and Arashi as he walked towards them with Pabu on his shoulder, but facing the wrong way for some reason. "Hey Bolan," Korra said in reply. She was sitting next to Naga on some steps leading into one of the buildings. Naga was currently on her back and having her stomach rubbed. Arashi was leaning against a column to her right. "Missed you at practice this week," he remarked. "Thank you for pointing out the obvious, Bolan," Arashi said with sarcasm and full force. "Sorry about that," the tribeswoman told her teammate. "Nah, it's alright," he said with a somber tone in his voice. "We're probably out of the tournament anyway, unless some money miraculously drops out of the sky by tomorrow. Or my Gigi suddenly remembers and sends a letter with the cash," Arashi added, feeling just as down as he was. But unlike the blonde, Bolan wasn't focused on that. "Anyways, the reason I came here was to give Korra this." He stepped onto the first step and held out a cupcake in a plastic bag and a rose. "Ta-da. Wow, thanks," Korra said, taking the gifts from him. She was surprised by it and was a little confused by the scowl on Arashi's face at the sight. "What's this for?" He turned away slightly and rubbed his chin, like he was trying to think deeply. Oh, I can't remember now," he said. "Oh yeah, now I remember. You saved me from Amon." "Oh, that. It was no big deal," she declared with a shrug of her shoulders. "No big deal, are you serious?" he asked. "I was totally freaking out when he was coming at him with his creepy mask all, 'I will take away your bending forever.'" He acted a little like a zombie as he imitated Amon's voice. "I mean that is scary stuff. I still can't sleep well." He wasn't the only one. Even as he spoke about it, Korra was reminded of her dream that night and what it all meant. She turned her head ever so slightly to look at Arashi, but his face was turned away from her, preventing her from seeing his full expression. "Delivery for Avatar Korra," someone announced from out of the blue. All heads turned to see a large mound of stuff coming towards them, attached to a pair of weak-looking legs. The mound was placed down on the steps, revealing a man in a uniform had been carrying it. "Terlock sends his compliments and urges you to reconsider his offer," he said to Korra, offering her a bow. "Tell him I haven't changed my mind," she said back shortly. He just bowed and walked away. "Who's this Terlock guy?" Bolan demanded. "Is he bothering you?" "Huh. 'Cause I can have a word with him." He punched his fist into his other hand to emphasize his point. That's real smart of you, Bolan, Arashi remarked. Threatening to punch the living daylights of the Northern Water Tribe representative on the council that runs the city is really smart. The earthbender's determined expression evaporated like water in intense heat. Oh, never mind. I'll just shut up now. That would probably be for the best. Location. Mako. Everywhere he looked, he saw the future. There were hundreds of assembly lines working on Satomobiles all around him, and they were all being sent out to be sold in the quickest time he had ever seen. Then again, this would have been the first time he had ever seen it. What do you think of my little operation here? Asami's father asked him. It's very impressive, Mr. Sato, he answered honestly. Please, call me Hiroshi. The man was dressed in an expensive suit but had a warm smile on his face. He wore spectacles, and while there were some gray hairs running through his black hair and mustache, they did not make him look old, rather refined. So, I understand you're dirt poor. Mako had been a little more than caught off guard by the blunt statement, so he was at a loss for words. But Hiroshi kept talking. Young man, it is nothing to be ashamed of. I too came from humble beginnings. Why, when I was your age, I was a mere shoe shiner, and all I had to my name was an idea. The Satomobile. Now, I was fortunate enough to meet someone who believed in me and my work ethic. He gave me the money I needed to get my idea off the ground, calling it a favor I could owe him, and I built the entire Future Industries empire from that one selfless loan. He looked out at the assembly lines as he finished his speech. Dad, stop bragging, his daughter chided him. Just tell Mako the good news. He chuckled and turned back to face their guest. What good news? Mako asked them, unsure of where this was going. Well, my daughter passionately told me all about your hard-earned success in the pro-bending arena. And about your team's current financial stumbling block, Hiroshi told him while putting a fatherly hand on his shoulder. Now I'd hate to see you lose your chance at winning the Memorial Championship just because you're short a few yuans. That's why I'm going to sponsor the Fire Ferrets in the tournament. Are you serious? The pro-bender asked, stepping back to look at him better. He's serious, Asami answered. My dad's going to cover your ante for the championship pot. Ah, that is good news. There's just one catch, Hiroshi told him. You all have to wear the Future Industries logo on your uniform. I'll tattoo it on my chest if you want to, sir, he answered, tapping his chest with his thumb and making both father and daughter laugh. Thank you so much, he told them both, shaking their hands. I promise the Fire Ferrets will make the most of this opportunity. A pensive look came onto his face as he withdrew. Although what? Asami asked him. Ah, it's nothing. I still have to let Bolan and Arashi know about this offer. He smiled at them. Don't worry, though. If I tell them what you've told me and I tell them about the tattoo thing, I'm sure that Arashi will have Bolan hold me down while he gets the ink. Location. Tenzin. As he listened to his daughter making car noises, he was walking towards the car she was in with her hands on the wheel. It was an extravagant-looking car, most likely fresh off the line, and had a nice big bow on the top of it. Out of the way, Daddy, Ikki said to him from the driver's seat. We're driving here. She made a lot of beeping noises, like she was honking the horn, and Milo, who was sitting in the passenger seat, joined her. Tenzin simply shook his head in exasperation and walked past the car. He saw Korra going through the stances and motions of airbending on a nearby lowered platform, with a symbol of the yin-yang emblazoned on it. I see Turloc's gifts are becoming more and more extravagant, he said to her as he came closer. Yeah, that guy doesn't know how to take no for an answer, she replied. Korra, are you doing alright? He asked. She stopped her training and looked at him. Yeah, I'm fine, she answered. He had a hard time believing that. So he sat down on the steps and suggested, why don't you take a break? She went over and sat down next to him. I'm glad you turned down Turlock, but I wanted to make sure your decision was for the right reason. I'm just really focused on my airbending right now is all, she told him. But as she spoke, she wasn't able to look at him directly, only out of the corner of her eye. Right, that's what you said. And now, he was sure he knew why she had refused. You know, it's okay to be scared. The whole city is frightened by what's going on. The important thing is to talk about our fears, because if we don't, they can throw us out of balance. She looked at him for a moment but still didn't say anything. Seeing that he could do nothing else, Tenzin stood up and went back up the steps. I'm always here for you, if you want to talk, he told her. Tenzin, she said to him, not even looking up at him as he stopped in mid-step. Can you tell me what happened to Arashi when his family died? It had been a question that had been on her mind ever since she had seen him in his nightmare, and she already knew she probably wouldn't get anywhere with the kid himself. But perhaps she might have better luck with people who knew him. But Tenzin didn't say anything. He walked away, leaving her alone. She spent the rest of the day alone, trying to train in airbending. But her thoughts kept coming back to Amon and Arashi. Eventually, she just stopped and tried to relax. She wasn't having much luck there either, but she tried. By the time night had fallen, she was sitting on a banister while Licky and Janora were playing Pi Show nearby. She watched idly, having played the game a couple of times herself in the compound. Avatar Korra, the uniformed man said to her as he came into sight. I have something for you. Her patience was at an end with this guy. He had come to the island multiple times bearing gifts from Terlock, and every time she sent him away. Now, she was going to do it more forcefully. It doesn't matter how many gifts Terlock sends, she told him after hopping down from the banister. I am not joining his task force. She bent the earth he was standing on around so that he was facing the other way and kicked him hard on the rear, sending him flying with a shriek of surprise. But as she turned around to walk away, he got back up. It's not a gift, he told her. It's an invitation. He pulled out an envelope from his vest. The what? She asked, surprised to hear about such a thing, but still a little suspicious. Terlock is throwing a gala in your honor, he explained as she took the envelope from him. All of Republic City's movers and shakers will be there. The councilman humbly requests your attendance. She didn't see any kind of danger with that kind of thing. In fact, it sounded kinda interesting. Fine, tell Terlock I'll be there, she finally answered. And tell him I'll be with Tenzin and his family. Of course, Avatar Korra, the page said in reply, bowing his head and walking away. Location: City Hall. Korra hadn't really been planning on attending galas and the like when she decided to come to Republic City, but fortunately for her, Tenzin had taken the initiative and ordered a few made for her when it was decided that she was staying for good. The one she was wearing was dark blue with touches of white around the collar, belt, and the lower part of the dress. It was a modest thing and she actually felt quite comfortable in it. The minute she, Arashi, and Tenzin and his family stepped into the hall, the people already in there began to applaud for her. I can't believe this is all for me, Korra said to Tenzin quietly as the applause began to die down. The airbending master was dressed in his finest, and so was his family. I'm not sure what Terlock's plotting, but keep your guard up, he warned her. It's not like him to throw a party just for the fun of it. As if he heard them talking about him, Terlock came out of the crowd in probably one of his best suits. So glad you could make it, Avatar Korra, he said with a grand voice. His eyes found Tenzin and Arashi. If you'll excuse us, the city awaits its hero, he told the two of them. As he and Korra walked off, Arashi leaned in more closely to Tenzin. Why did you have to bring me here? He asked in a whisper that would not go above the voices of the people around them. Terlock was smart, Arashi, Tenzin whispered back. He made sure to include your name on Korra's invitation. That way, there would have been no doubt that she'd bring you. You are her friend and I'm sure he wants her to as comfortable as possible before springing the trap he's got planned. The blonde tugged at the collar of the shirt he was wearing, feeling like it was trying to strangle him in a slow manner. The shoes he was wearing felt they were about to pinch his toes, and it felt like the pants would rip if he took it too large of a step or turned way too fast. These were just some of the reasons why he didn't like wearing suits or attending stuff that forced him to wear a suit. But they weren't the primary reason. I'm sure that he had me invited just so people could have a chance to look and stare at me, he groused. Already, he could see it begin to happen, the sly looks and the subtle looks all telling him what they thought of him. They couldn't have been more wrong, but it still hurt. It will only hurt you if you let it, Arashi, the older man beside him said. Well, I'd rather let them believe what they think has happened, rather figure out the truth. The truth was odd, embarrassing, and now horrifying, due to Amon, than what they could ever think of. His eyes roamed around the hall until he saw Milo doing something he probably shouldn't be doing. Tenzin. The air nomad turned his head just time to see what the blonde was seeing, and it went purple at the sight. Milo, no. He shouted at his son as people were starting to look. That is not a toilet. Oh dear, he said, going over to his son. Arashi grinned at the sight, finding it funny. Then he moved away, going into the throngs of people that were all around him. He looked around for Korra, figuring that it would be best to stay by her side and make sure nothing happened. He found her quickly enough, just in time for Terlock to be making some introductions. Korra, it's my pleasure to introduce Republic City's most famous industrialist, Hiroshi Sato, the councilman introduced the two. Nice to meet you, Korra said to the man with a small bob of her head. He, on the other hand, bowed his head with a bit more formality. We're all expecting great things from you, he told her. Right, greatness, she replied, saying that last word with a touch of sadness and worry, not even able to make eye contact with the man. Hey, Korra, Arashi said to her as he appeared by her side. Hey, Arashi, she said back. Hey Korra, called out Mako as he, Bolan, and a girl came to stand beside Mr. Sato. Both he and Bolan were dressed up as well, and she found Mako to look quite striking in his suit. The girl on his arm, however, drew her jealousy instantly. It didn't help that she was quite beautiful. This is my daughter, Asami, Mr. Sato introduced the girl. "It's lovely to meet you," she said to Korra. "Mako's told me so much about you." "Really? Because he hasn't mentioned you at all," she said back in a short tone of voice and with crossed arms. "Korra, be nice," Arashi told her, pressing his elbow against her side a little. "Ah, Mr. and Miss Sato, I would like you to meet Arashi Uzumaki," Terlock said like he had just realized the blonde was there with them. "Uzumaki?" repeated Mr. Sato. "As in?" "Yes, Sazan Uzumaki was my dad," Arashi answered, stopping him before he had a chance to finish. "Actually, I was going to ask if you were the grandson of Naruto Uzumaki," he said with a good-humored smile on his lips. "Yeah, that too," he admitted with a moment of hesitation. He was more used to people thinking of him as the son of Sazan, not the grandson of Naruto. "So, how did you two meet?" Korra asked Mako and Asami, still focused on them. Bolan was the one to give her that answer, appearing beside her in an instant and almost knocking Arashi down in the process. Asami crashed into him on his moat, he told her before vanishing from her side in an instant. "What? Are you okay?" she asked Mako, concerned. "I'm fine. More than fine," he answered with a smile. "Mr. Sato agreed to sponsor our team, we're back in the tournament." "Isn't that great?" Bolan asked her excitedly as he latched onto his brother's shoulder. "Yeah, terrific," she answered without any actual emotion in her voice. "Chief Bifrong," Terlock called out to the chief of police as she passed by, getting her attention and making her came over to their little group. "I believe you and Avatar Korra have already met." Seeing the scowl on the tribeswoman's face at the sight of her, she returned it with a glare. "Just because the city's throwing you this big tutu, don't think you're something special." "I thought she was the Avatar," Arashi sarcastically remarked. The police chief gave him a look before turning her glare back at Korra. "You've done absolutely nothing to deserve this," she told her. "Speaking of deserving," the blonde amongst them said, cutting into the conversation with a glare of his own at the older woman. "At what point were you planning to tell me that my uncle was in jail, Lin?" "With any luck, never," she answered, giving him a scowl in return to his glare. "I had to find out from the newspapers. I could have at least gotten a phone call. I was worried about him." "Arashi, we have told you many times to stay away from Lightning Bolt's ult. He's dangerous. He's my uncle. He's a criminal who would have tried to indoctrinate you into a life of crime if things were different." The glare he had was softened by those words, like he had smacked across the face. "You don't know that," he grounded out. Her scowl had softened as well, but it was because she had realized what she had said somewhat. "Kid, I've seen men and women like him plenty of times. And if you've seen one, you've seen them all. I want to see him." "Not gonna happen, not by yourself." She turned and walked away from the group, back into the crowd. The group splintered off and joined the crowd as well, moving the gala on. But almost as soon as they took their eyes off of her, Tenzin, his family, Arashi, and her teammates lost sight of her. When they saw her again, she was standing on the flight of stairs that led up to the council room with Terlock by her side. The reporters also saw this and knew what that meant. They flocked to the bottom of the stairs, shouting questions and taking pictures. "If you would be so kind," Terlock said to Korra. "They just have a few questions." Korra was surprised by this, she hadn't expected it. But she tried to protest, only to have Terlock push her forward to the reporters. Lights were flashing in her eyes as the cameras went off, almost blinding her. "Avatar Korra, you witnessed Amon take away people's bending firsthand. How serious a threat does he pose to the innocent citizens of Republic City?" one of the reporters asked her. She cleared her throat before speaking. "I think he presents a real problem," she answered. But she sounded a little uncertain as she did. "Then why have you refused to join Terlock's task force?" another reporter asked her. "As the Avatar, shouldn't you be going after Amon?" "Well, why are you backing away from this fight?" That offended her deeply. "What? No. I've never backed away from anything in my life." "You promised to serve the city, aren't you going back on that promise now?" a third reporter asked her. "Do you think pro-bending is more important than fighting the revolution?" a fourth asked. "How do you think Avatar On would have handled this?" a fifth wondered. She felt like she was getting swarmed by all the questions and she didn't know how to answer most of them. Her breaking point came when a reporter asked, "Are you afraid of Amon?" "I am not afraid of anybody." She yelled at the reporters, making them all stop with their questions. "If the city needs me," then she gestured back to Terlock. "I'll join Terlock's task force and help fight Amon. There's your headline, folks." Terlock declared as he swooped in and placed his hand on her shoulder with the other hand outstretched, making it a picture-perfect sight. The camera people saw that and immediately began snapping photos. In the crowd, Mako and Bolan looked at one another with confusion in their eyes. Tenzin simply closed his eyes, knowing full well that Korra had been trapped, and Arashi pinching the bridge of his nose, wondering how Korra could have gotten led around by the nose like that. A day later, Korra was sitting at one of the ends of a U-shaped table in the uniform of the task force alongside the rest of the task force. She was easily the youngest there. The rest looked like they had been selected from the police. All sat straight with their backs against the seats. She was the only one who was leaning forward and twiddling with her thumbs. "My fellow task force deputies," Terlock began, dressed in the same uniform and standing before the table. "Tonight we will execute a raid on an underground Kai blocker training camp located in the Dragon Flats borough." He pointed at the blueprint of a building that had put up on the wall behind him. "According to my sources, there is a cellar underneath this bookstore where Equalists train Kai blocking in secret." "How do we go in, sir?" one of the other task members asked him. "We will go in by truck, staying hidden until we reach our destination. With us we will be taking a tanker of water for the waterbenders. Once we've reached the target and assessed that it is as my sources say, we will attack in waves. The first wave will be the waterbenders to catch the Equalists with their water and freeze them. The second wave will be the earthbenders to take down who weren't caught by the first wave. After that, there should be no more left. Any questions?" He asked the task force, only to have silence for an answer. "Then we move out." "Here we go," Korra thought to herself as they stood up from their seats and began walking out the door. "I must thank you for joining this task force, Avatar Korra," Terlock said as he joined in the hallway at the back of the group. "That's not necessary," she told him, having long figured out that he had tricked her into joining. "Still, I feel that I must thank you anyway. But I also must caution you in your choice of friends. If you make the wrong one, it could very well haunt you for the rest of your life." If they were alone, she might have stopped to look at him. Instead, she just turned her head a little. "What do you mean by that and who are you talking about?" "Why, I am talking about Arashi Uzumaki. It would be best for your reputation if you distanced yourself from him from now on." Her eyes narrowed at the suggestion. "What are you talking about? Is something wrong with him?" "No, not in the extreme sense of the word," he trailed off and looked at her. "You mean to say you haven't learned about his skills?" "What skills? I don't know if he's even a bender or not." "Oh no, he is a firebender. Just not a very good one," he answered, sounding very amused by her questions. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. "You know that his parents are Sazan and Shu Uzumaki, two of the most powerful firebenders of their time, and that he is the grandson of Princess Azula herself. They were all great benders, able to bend great columns of fire and wield lightning with considerable ease. Arashi, from what my sources have told me, has trouble barely holding a flame in his hand. You can understand how that would be embarrassing to him and his family." She didn't say anything in response, feeling a little insulted that he would think she would care about such a thing. But a few things about the kid made a bit more sense now that she had heard this piece of news. Of course, it could just be nonsense. If she wanted to know the truth, she would have to ask Arashi himself. But now was not the time to think on that. Once the task force was outside, they climbed into the truck waiting for them, staying out of sight as it began driving towards their destination. No one said a word, and no one peeked over the edge to see where they were going. They knew that part and they didn't need to see anything in between the city hall and their target in the borough. But once the truck stopped, they moved, hopping out of the truck and onto the street. The building in front of them had no obvious lights on, trying to tell everyone who saw it that it was closed for the night. But light leaked out from the covered basement windows. The task force snuck up to the wall, and then a few looked inside the windows. Korra was among those few, and once she looked past the blinds and into the basement proper, she saw that Terlock had been right. It was a place for Kai blocking. People had masks on with the Equalist symbol emblazoned on it, practicing on either wooden posts or on one another, all under the gaze of trainers. On the far back wall were two Equalist banners, and in the middle of them was a poster of Amon's face. The sight of that masked face made her remember her dream in an instant, especially the part when he was reaching for her. She recoiled away from the window for a moment, gasping for air. But then she recomposed herself and waited as Terlock signaled the task force members still on the truck. He opened the top of the tanker and bent the water inside out into the open and down to the other waterbenders. The first took and then sent it to the next, making it look like a small river hanging in the air. Once all the waterbenders had their water, the river disappeared as they took a part of it and held it in a glob shape. They all waited for Terlock to give the signal, taking deep breaths to steady themselves. But once his hand dropped, the waterbenders poured their water through the windows into the basement. It was a flood and caught most of the Equalists by surprise, sweeping them up in its current. Just as soon as it appeared, it also froze solid, trapping the Equalists inside. The earthbenders went through the windows and began taking out the remaining Equalists. Both Terlock and Korra joined them with their own water. The Equalists who hadn't been caught by the water of the earth, being only two, decided to retreat. As one opened the door to the basement to leave, the other flipped through to avoid a blast of water and threw smoke grenades at the task force, hoping to blind them long enough for them to escape. But Korra had seen those grenades in action before and froze them before the smoke covered the entire room. I'm going after those two. She shouted at the task force, heading for the closed door, kicking it open. In front of her was a long hall with neither of the two Equalists in sight. But she started to run down it anyway, hoping to catch them before they escaped. But as she ran, it didn't take long for her to get slowed down. As her foot hit a tripwire, she stumbled and fell to the ground. When she looked up, she saw an Equalist waiting in the rafters above. He leapt down, intending to strike her as she laid there. But she regained her footing somewhat and flipped out of the way, sending him upwards with chunk of rock she bent up out of the ground. She fell down again, this time on her bottom, and another Equalist was ready for her, this time with a bola. He was sent to the wall by a burst of water that promptly froze once he was there. Korra looked over at her savoir and said, "Nice timing. Thanks, Terlock." The councilman just smiled and declared, "We make a good team, Avatar." She got back onto her feet and looked at the two Equalists they took down in a matter of seconds. "Yeah, we do." Location: Pro Bending Arena. Mako was reading the newspaper in the gym, particularly the article on the new task force in Korra. They had couple of pictures of the whole thing, the most prominent one being Korra leading the way through a crowd of reporters, with tied-up Equalists behind her and Terlock at her side. "No Korra for practice again?" asked Bolan as he came by with two earth discs floating above his hands. "Doesn't look like it," he answered, making his brother throw the discs away. "Hey, be careful with those, Bolan." Toza snapped from where he was sweeping the floor. "Those things aren't easy to make, and I'd rather not have Butaka take it out of my hide and money." "Sorry, Toza," Bolan said absently. He looked over at his brother. "And where is Arashi? I would have thought he'd be here to train us into the ground more because we're in." The blonde had been on their case about that ever since Mako told them the news, even telling Bolan to hold his brother down while he went to get the ink after hearing the tattoo comment. "I can't help you there, bro," Mako answered. He said he was going to keep an eye on Korra to make sure she didn't fall for any more of that tribesman's tricks. He took notice of his brother look and added, "His words, not mine." "Do you think that there's a little more to it than just that?" "Why would there be? He's 12 and she's our age." He folded up the newspaper and put it down. "Look, I gotta go." "Another date with Asami?" asked his brother. He smiled a little goofily and said, "Yeah." Location: Arashi. He didn't have a pass to the press conference that Terlock had called, but he knew enough of City Hall to know how to get past the security and be there without being seen. Who knew those tips from Gigi on being sneaky would come in handy one day. He always thought it was a lark on Gigi's part. He watched from the shadows as Terlock spoke to the press from the podium. "Avatar Korra has bravely answered the call to action," the councilman said with Korra at his side. "With the two of us leading the charge, Republic City has nothing to fear Amon and the Equalists." Well, at least he was considerate enough to put her name in there too, Arashi thought to himself. "Question for the Avatar." One of the reporters shouted out. "Amon still remains at large. Why have you failed to locate him?" "You wanna know why?" Korra asked, coming up to the podium and the microphones on it. "Because Amon is hiding in the shadows like a coward," she declared before taking one of the microphones into her hand. "Amon, I challenge you to a duel, no task force, no Kai blockers, just the two of us tonight at midnight on Avatar on Memorial Island. Let's cut to the chase and settle this thing, if you're man enough to face me." She put the microphone down and walked off stage, and the second she did, the reporters started throwing questions right at her. She ignored them all and kept on walking. Meanwhile, Arashi was just staring at her with stunned expression on his face. "Geez, I didn't think she'd take my word so literally," he thought. Location: Mako. His date with Asami was going well. They had just finished dinner and were now going through the park in a motorized carriage with a driver in the back. That way, they had an open view of the park in the evening, which was quite beautiful. "I know it sounds weird to say this," Asami told him as the carriage rolled onward, holding onto his arm. "But I'm really glad I hit with my moped." He couldn't help but chuckle at those words. Me too," he replied. "I forgot to ask. Why didn't you accept the new silk scarf I bought for you last week?" She fingered his scarf. "You didn't like it?" she asked with a curious and slightly worried tone in her voice. "No, it was really nice," he assured her. "It was a scarf that he wouldn't have been able to buy if his life had depended on it, but this scarf was my father's," he explained, his hand going for the scarf around his neck like he was reminding himself that it was still there. "And it's all I have left of him. I just feel like it keeps me safe." "I'm so sorry," she apologized right away. She looked down at her lap. "I lost my mother when I was very young." When she felt her hand being enfolded by Mako's hand, she looked up and smiled at him, which he returned. Then she leaned into his side. "I feel so safe with you," she told him quietly. "I'm glad," he told her. Location: Korra. She stood in a boat, taking the rope that held it to the docks and winding it up. She was preparing herself to go the island to finish this once and for all. The sound of an air glider filled her ears for a brief moment, and when she looked up, she saw Tenzin landing on the dock. "Korra, this is madness," he told her. "Don't try to stop me and don't follow me," she said to him. "I have to face Amon alone." As she turned her attention back to the rope in her hands, Tenzin turned to look at Terlok. "This is all you're doing?" he accused the tribesman. "I tried to talk her out of it too," Terlok said, raising his hand slightly in protest. "But she's made up her mind." As they argued, she was done with the rope, putting it down in the boat so it wouldn't fly out at the worst possible time. She bent the water beneath her to surge her boat forward, sending it almost flying harshly across the waves to the island. She made it there in less than 3 minutes. Once she had tied off the boat, she all but ran for the top of the building on the island. There, at the base of Avatar Ong, she waited. Her nerves were all bundled up and she was restless, inching for a fight. But in that moment, it felt like she was the only thing that was alive, and that just made her even more restless. A small sound to her left made her turn quickly into a stance, ready for a fight. But there was nothing there. She stood down from the stance only to yelp in surprise as a loud bell began to ring beneath her feet. It was the clock built into the building, and it rang for all who could hear it that it was now midnight. For Korra, it was time for the duel. She tried to steady herself with a deep breath and looked out at the city lights. "Man, you are wound up tight," Arashi's voice said from out of nowhere, making her almost leap out of her skin. When she turned around, she saw the kid standing there before her. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "I said that no one was supposed to follow me." "I didn't, I got here before you did." "Why?" "I thought you would need the company." "Go away, Arashi," she ordered. "No," he refused instantly. "Go away." "No, I'm not leaving you alone here. What kind of friend would I be if I did?" She wanted to argue that point, but she found herself too focused on facing Amon. He should be coming soon. "Fine, whatever," she said, sitting down on the roof facing the city. The blonde sat down next to her. "Thanks," he said to her. She didn't say anything back. She was waiting for her opponent to show himself. But as the minutes dragged on and Amon didn't show himself, questions about the kid sitting by her side began to sprout up in her mind. "Arashi," she said to him. "If you're going to be up here with me, you'll to answer the questions I have about you." "Alright," he answered. "On a mission with the task force, Terlok told me about you, about how despite my lineage, I was a pathetic firebender who was an embarrassment to my family, right?" he asked, cutting her off. His voice had turned harder when he spoke, as opposed to the easy tone he had moment before. "Right," she answered. "Is it true? I've never seen you firebend." "It used to be true. I had a little sister 4 years younger than me, and she was being called a prodigy. My grandmother used to say we were her and Fire Lord Zuko come again." He had always held onto those words because he remembered that the Fire Lord had improved remarkably in the last year of the 100-Year War. "Used to be?" she repeated, not sure if she had heard him right. He became silent for a moment. "I don't know what happened exactly, but ever since the night my parents and grandmother died, I haven't been able to bend at all." She stared at him with a look of shock on her face. "You what?" she couldn't help but ask him. "I can't bend," he repeated himself with none of his usual eye-rolling or sarcasm. "What happened?" "I just told you that I don't know what happened. I can remember bits and pieces, but the rest is a blank." It also doesn't help that the bits and pieces usually came back to him in nightmares that never made any real sense. "How did they die?" she asked, despite knowing that she was treading on potentially thin ice with that question. But she also felt that it was important to knowing him and what happened to him. "They told me that they died in the fire that burned down the house." She frowned slightly at those words, seeing the fault in them. 3 of probably the strongest firebenders in current history were killed by a fire. Either that is probably the greatest irony or that's just a story. Most people tend to believe that it's an irony. Plus, from what I can remember, it fits. The sound of people screaming, the feeling of intense heat washing all over his skin, the image of the parlor lit in flames, his parents telling him to run, they all fit the story he had been given when they had found him. "Do you think Amon was involved?" "Again, I don't know. But with what we've seen him do, I guess it's possible." "It should be more than possible," she said with conviction. "He can take people's bending away. How else would you explain how you can't bend anymore? If you lost it, then that means he was behind the deaths of your family." "Maybe, but I don't know." That single fact haunted him ever since that night, along with a sense that he could have done more. "Besides, most people would rather believe that I'm still pathetic at firebending than believe that I can't bend." He preferred it like that. She didn't have a reply to that or have any more questions. They sat there, waiting in silence as the seconds and the minutes dragged on. For Korra, it seemed longer. She knew that Amon was there, somewhere. But she didn't know the sum, let alone the where. But as the lights in the city died down, she finally yawned and stretched. "Guess you're a no-show, Amon," she remarked, having waited for probably 2 hours or more. "Who's scared now?" "I take it you don't want me to answer that?" Arashi asked her as they both stood up. "You would be right." "Alright," he said as they walked off the roof and down to ground floor. "I'm hungry, you think that we'll be able to get something from the kitchen at Air Temple Island?" "If we manage to sneak past Tenzin," she answered, stretching her hands back behind her head. Now that they were talking about it, she felt hungry too. "So if we get caught, only you'll get in trouble," he remarked as they passed the entrance to the building. "Hey, you're here too. That means you'll get in as much trouble." As her feet were yanked from under her, sending her to the ground with a rope wrapped around her legs. For a brief moment, she saw that Arashi was in the same way. Then they started getting dragged into the building by the ropes, where all they could see was darkness. Korra broke free of her bindings easily, spinning them off with a kick and a burst of fire. The fire illuminated the room, showing that the two of them were surrounded by Equalists, enclosing them in a circle. As the fire died away, the last thing she saw were the light reflected off the goggles, making them look like eyes of evil spirits, waiting in the darkness. She threw another burst of fire, lighting the room again, only to have her arms restrained by bolas. She used her feet to throw more fire and move the floor against them, trying to fight and win with all she had. But then she was struck in the back, making her groan in pain and fall unconscious. She felt herself being hoisted up to her knees as she came back to consciousness. The circle of Equalists was still there, and there was now light coming from lanterns on the floor. She wanted to fight free, but when Amon appeared before her, her body froze up. "I received your invitation, young avatar," he said to her. He stretched out his hand and all she could think of was how similar it was to her dream. "Spirits, Tenzin, Ong, Mako, Bolan, Arashi, please, someone, help," she silently begged as the hand came towards her. He was going to take away her bending, she just knew it. As the hand was about to touch her, she bent her head and closed her eyes, afraid of what was going to come next. But instead, the hand took her chin and forced her to look up at him. "Our showdown, while inevitable, is premature," he told her in a calm, cold voice. "Although it would be the simplest thing for me to take away your bending right now, I want. You'd only become a martyr." He took his hand away from her chin. "Benders of every nation would rally behind your untimely demise. But I assure you, I have a plan. And I'm saving you for last. Then you'll get your duel, and I will destroy you." He stood up and moved over to Arashi, who was being held like she was right next to her. "As for you, Arashi Uzumaki, you are just as much a Saiyan as she is. I did not plan on having you here tonight, but rest assured, I will not kill you either. I'll give you the chance to see if you can find what you are looking for, then I will destroy you as well." Remarkably, his words made Arashi try and fight free of the hands holding him down. "You know." He shouted at Amon, getting a foot on the ground to support himself, fighting to stand up. "Where is she? Where is she?" Amon did not reply to his shouting, he simply struck them both in the neck. Korra felt herself go limp, her vision already going blurry. As she fell to the ground, the last thing she saw was the entrance. As her eyes closed into darkness, it was like the past was waiting for her there. Visions began to cloud her mind, showing her images. She saw her own grandfather, frowning slightly. She saw Toph Bifrong, standing watch with two of her men. She saw Ong watching something from behind a seat. She saw a man she didn't know. And then she saw Ong flying down a street atop an air scooter, an angry look on his face. Just as quickly as they came, the visions vanished and she was back in the memorial building, staring at the entrance. She saw a figure running towards her, but she couldn't tell who it was, only that it was an air nomad. "Ong," she said in a weakened voice. "Korra." The air nomad shouted as he reached her, revealing himself to be Tenzin, not Ong. "Korra, are you alright?" he asked as he pulled her up from the ground. "What happened? Was Amon here?" She moved slightly out of his grip. "Yeah, he ambushed us," she answered. Did he take your bending away?" She opened her hand and tried bending a flame to appear. Thankfully, it did and she extinguished it. "No, I'm okay." "Thank goodness," he said with relief. At those words, everything she had been holding back, keeping locked down tight ever since she saw the revelation, came bursting out. Tears came flooding out of her eyes, and she cried openly as she reached out and grabbed hold of Tenzin. "I was so terrified," she confessed, the tears still falling. "I felt so helpless." "It's all right," he told her, putting a comforting hand on her back. "The nightmare is over." Still crying, she broke her hold of him and looked in the face. You were right. I've been scared this whole time. I've never felt like this before and Tenzin, I don't know what to do." Seeking comfort, she clutched him again. "Admitting your fears is the first and most difficult step in overcoming them," he told her. She cried for another minute and then looked up at him with a worried expression. "Arashi, where's Arashi?" she demanded, half in a panic. "It's okay, I found him outside," he assured her. He was trying to go after Amon, shouting that he knew where she was. I had to knock him out from going anywhere, he was struggling so much to go after the Equalists. Who's she? Korra asked. He fell silent. Has Arashi told you what happened when his family died? He told me that they burned to death when the house caught fire. That was the story we gave the city and Arashi, he told her. The truth is that Sazan, Shu, and Lady Azula Uzumaki were murdered and the fire was used for a cover. Arashi was the only survivor because he had been told to run away. We found him a week later on the streets. Then who is this she he keeps talking about? He's referring to his sister, Natsumi Uzumaki. No one has seen her after the fire, we've assumed that she had died too. But Arashi still believes she's alive. Why? Because the last thing he remembered before waking up the day after the fire was that he was running from the house with her holding onto his hand. End chapter. So this part ends here. If you want to see next part of this series, like the video now and share the story with your friends. Bye bye.